Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.
Welcome everyone to today's Environment Committee meeting, our first formal meeting of the new Assembly year. Members of the public may like to follow at London Assembly on X and use the hashtag Assembly Environment for this meeting. May I please remind everyone to switch phones to silent mode and ask that members and guests ensure that electronic devices are not placed in front of their microphones. Members and guests are also reminded to position their microphones so they can be heard clearly. If you need to move your microphone, please do so by picking it up from the base. The main item for discussion today is building action on net zero. Today's meeting will be split into two parts. The first will be an introductory discussion with the new Deputy Mayor for Environment and Energy. Following that, we'll move on to the first part of the committee's investigation into building action on net zero. Before we begin, we just have a few items of business to attend to, so please do excuse us. Can I now ask our committee officer, Sal Faisal, to confirm any apologies for today's meeting?
Thank you, Chair. No apologies have been received.
Thank you, Sal. Declarations of interest. Can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 2 and ask if members have any other interest to declare? No. Thank you. Membership of the committee, terms of reference and standing delegations. I'm proposing we take agenda item 3, 4 and 5 together. Can I ask the committee to note the membership and chairing arrangements for terms of reference for the committee and the standing delegations of authority to the chair as agreed at the Assembly's annual meeting on 10th of May 2024? Noted. Thank you. Minutes. Can I ask the committee to confirm the minutes of a meeting held on 6th of March 2024 to be signed by me as a correct record? Thank you. Summary list of actions. Can I ask the committee to note the completed and closed actions arising from its previous meetings and the additional correspondence received? Thank you. Actions taken under delegated authority. Can I ask the committee to note the actions taken by me and the former chair under delegated authority, namely to agree the committee's letters and reports as outlined in the agenda report? Thank you. Responses to committee outputs. Can I ask the committee to note the responses to its outputs attended as appendices to the agenda report? Noted. Thank you very much, committee. We can now move on to our introductory discussion with Mehdi Koban, MBE. Welcome, Mehdi. You are the new Deputy Mayor for Environment and Energy. Alongside the Deputy Mayor is Catherine Barber, the GLA's Assistant Director for Environment and Energy. Welcome to you both. If I can start with you, Deputy Mayor, what are your main priorities in this role?
Thank you, Zach. Thank you, Chair. It's great to be back here at the Environment Committee. Some of you will remember, but I was actually here when last year when we were speaking about community energy, and I was here to give evidence around Hackney's groundbreaking community energy fund, which helped fund 14 landmark buildings. And I know that the committee went to visit the Leaside Trust and led to some great development of work. Firstly, if I could just say I'm proud to step up my city and serve my city and to be asked to be the Deputy Mayor of London for Environment and Energy. It's a great honour. And I want to be a Deputy Mayor who's able to be open, collaborative and engaging. So I really want to work with you as we help deliver on the Mayor's priorities, but also on London's priorities too. And that's why I've been very busy over the past 7 weeks. So I've visited 15 boroughs in London. I went to visit a roundabout in Tolworth, the biggest SUD in London, 6,000 square metres, which is helping protect against flood protection, but also helping making sure that we're cleaning our waterways. Catford Bus Garage, where we're able to see how we're helping support the Mayor's ambition to deliver on 0% zero emission fleet, 100% by 2030, but also some amazing public realm projects in areas like Haringey, in Lambeth, where we're literally transforming streets to create much more livable neighbourhoods. And it's been great to see what's already happening around London and how we're already delivering the greenest city in the world. It's also important for me to make sure that we're working with Londoners, our stakeholders, the committee, and the boroughs. And I think one of the things that I bring to this role with my experience is I was a councillor in Hackney for 10 years. Previously serving as a cabinet member for climate change, environment and transport, where I led the delivery of a £61 million Green New Deal, the biggest Green New Deal for a borough in London, and where we completely transformed and took drastic action around improving our air quality, but also how we are able to decarbonise our buildings, but also how we are able to reimagine our neighbourhoods too. And I know that boroughs have a huge role to play in helping reach the Mayor's ambition of reaching net zero in 2030. We're very clear that that's something that we need to work collaboratively with our stakeholders to do that. So that's why, last week, for example, I convened a meeting here, a roundtable with leaders from the community energy world in London, and that was a great way for us to look at how can we accelerate community energy across the city. And that's really important because it's all around how do we make sure that not only we're able to deliver on clean green energy, but we're making sure that that communities are at the heart of shaping that and delivering that for their communities. The other thing that I done the other day on Tuesday night was we convened young Londoners to talk about how we can shape nature in our city, and that was fantastic. I could see Ashok here in the crowd. I know that Ashok was also at the event too, and it was just so inspiring to hear from young Londoners to understand their perspectives about what they want to see around their communities. And for me, and for the mayor, this is an issue of social justice, it's an issue of racial justice, but also economic justice. And we're very clear that as we seek to embark on delivering the mayor's manifesto priorities, we're able to do that, embedding social justice really at the heart of that. But that could only work by working together with Londoners. And so I want to, really engage in much more deliberative forms of engagement, bringing in also my experience of working at My Life, My Say, where we put young people's voices at the heart of democracy. And I think I want to see much more of that in my role. And that's one of the things that I've been speaking to GLA officials. The other thing I should say is yesterday, you see, I got this swimming guide map next to me. The mayor yesterday reaffirmed his commitment to cleaning our waterways and our rivers in the next 10 years. We went out with a message to say the decade of change starts now. We were joined by Steve Reed, the Secretary of State for DEFRA, the local MP, Rachel Blake, and that was a fantastic way. We were brought together partners to really set out our mission for how we plan to tackle pollution in our rivers. And that's really important, because even if I reflect on the conversation that we had with young Londoners, that was one of the things that they spoke about, which is around how do we make sure that we create much more thriving spaces, blue spaces, green spaces for our city. And that's something that is really important to me. Che, if I may just say, I just want to also pay tribute to my predecessor, Shirley Rodriguez, who really led the way in sort of leading London's transition to reaching net zero to 2030. Shirley has been great help over the past few weeks, just helping support me in my role and giving me advice that has been invaluable. But also the late Nikki Gavran too. When I was 16 or 17, many people don't know this, but in the old City Hall, I came to visit on a school trip, and Nikki Gavran was there, and she's one of the, there's so many ways we can describe Nikki, but we wouldn't be where we are if it wasn't for Nikki's leadership on climate change. And the fact that I'm here in my role doing what I'm doing is testament to Nikki's leadership. So I just wanted to pay tribute to Nikki. But thank you so much for inviting me today. I'm really excited about coming out, visiting some of your constituencies. I know me and Joe went out to Haringey, where we went to visit on a visit too. And I really want to work with you to make sure that we're delivering for Londoners, but more importantly, by working together with Londoners. Thank you.
Just some brief questions, because I'm aware we've only got you for a small amount of time. I want to return to the Deputy Mayor, Shirley Rodriguez, your predecessor, who I'd like to pay tribute to again. But how do your responsibilities compare to what Shirley was doing?
So my responsibilities with Shirley Rodriguez is the same, in the sense that it's the same role. What I'm very focused on in my role is making sure that we're delivering on the mayor's manifesto priorities. The mayor's been very clear about what he wants to see, both to me, but also the mandate, the historic third term that he was able to secure going into the election too. And that's around, one is around how do we make sure that we're able to connect Londoners with green spaces and nature. The mayor committed to a Green Roots Fund, and that's one of the things that I've been speaking to GLA officials around. How do we co-produce and co-design this fund by working together with Londoners? And that's really, really important. Second thing is obviously how we clean our rivers, and you've seen the commitment to that. We're going to be convening a roundtable over the next few months with key partners to make sure that we're able to develop a framework around a plan that can really set out London's ambition, but also getting support from some of the international community. So if you looked at yesterday's press release and commitment, we had supporting quotes from both the Mayor of Boston, and that was really important for us, because obviously, we need to learn from some of the work that's happened globally, and that's going to be very important as we move forward. But also how we deliver net zero schools. In my previous role in Hackney, I delivered many schools had, much more solar panels as a result of the Community Energy Fund that we delivered. And what we've been doing over the past few weeks, since I've started my role working with Catherine and the team, is looking at options on how we can make sure that we're helping support schools so they can save money on their energy bills and invest it much more into TAs, to books for children, and actual essential resources that are going to help the children thrive in their schools. So that's my priority as we move forward, and I want to bring that focus by working together with Londoners and delivering on that.
Thank you. And Shirley was on the board of C40 Cities, and she's remaining so. Does that mean you'll have less engagement with C40 than Shirley did?
No, it doesn't mean that we'll have less involvement with C40. I've already had a lot of engagement with C40 since I've become the Deputy Mayor. I sat in a meeting with the Mayor on a steering group. I've been working very closely with C40 to make sure that the Mayor is able to carry out his responsibilities as the co-chair. As I said, yesterday's announcement on the rivers, again, C40 had a role to play in making sure that we had the right learning that we can sort of access from other cities, and that's exactly what I want to do. And, you know, C40 is an important part. You know, London is a global leader on tackling the climate crisis. There's so much that we can learn from other cities. This is a global effort, but also the UK mayors as well, Chair. One of the other things that I was part of, which I didn't mention, but when I started my role, in the first week or two, I actually sat into a meeting with UK mayors together with the Secretary of State, Steve Reed, looking at, for example, how we can boost our circular economy, what we can do around making sure that we're able to, again, clean our waterways, looking at waste policy more broadly and generally as well. And it's really important that we work collaboratively with other cities, both here in the UK and internationally, to make sure that we're able to deliver on that.
Thank you. And final question from me. One of the things that Shelley was supporting was the East London Waterworks Park. This was an answer to an MQ in 2022. Can I just check, is your support going to continue?
I'll need to look more closer to that, and I could refer to maybe to...
Yeah, perhaps we can follow up.
We could follow up on that.
If you could write to the committee with that, that would be great.
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you. Assemblymember Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. Good to hear that you visited the Enfield and Haringey constituency with its local assembly member, and I've seen photographs of you visiting something or the other, it looked like a hole in the ground, with Assembly Member Small Edwards, but you said you visited 15 boroughs. Have you made sure that one of the Assembly members who represented the local constituency accompanied you on all of these visits? Because I don't remember seeing Assembly Member Duval with you when you visited Catford Bus Garage, for example.
That's a very good question, Assembly Member, and I think it's something that, coming into my role, I've been very clear to Catherine and the team to make sure that every single visit that I do, every single local decision makers are invited to that. So be it the Assembly Member, the council leaders, Member of Parliaments. I know from being a councillor for 10 years how important it is when people do come to your constituency or to the borough or to the area that you represent. From my understanding, everyone has been invited whenever we have gone out on a visit.
Really?
And if it hasn't,
I have information that you visited things in Islington and actually in your backyard in Hackney, and Assembly Member Moema was not invited. Is there a reason for that? It's a bit hard for you to sit here in front of us and talk about you'd love to collaborate with us if you can't be bothered to invite us along to things and don't even let us, even if you don't invite us, not even to let us know that the visit is taking place.
If I may, the Deputy Mayor has made it
I'm not
very,
talking
very...
to you. I'm terribly sorry. I didn't ask you to be here today. It's I want to talk to the Deputy Mayor.
Sure.
Thank you very much, Catherine.
I've been very, very clear to officers that whenever invites are going out for visits, that they make sure that invites have happened. If that is the case about Islington and it hasn't happened, I'm happy to take that away with Catherine and the team. But that is something that I've been very clear from day one, to make sure that every single decision maker locally is invited. And if that's happened, then I'll pick that up with the team and come back to you on that.
And, you know, Assembly Member Roberts is here. He also represents a constituency. Assembly Member Prince, likewise, and Assembly Member Turrell, too. I mean, we are mostly on this committee, I think, actually, apart from the chair, we all represent local constituencies. And it's very important to us when deputy mayors come to visit that we know about these visits, and preferably that we can come. And you've been able to name that you've been to things with the Secretary of State and MPs, but apart from Assembly Member McCartney, I haven't heard you mention any other Assembly members. So, you know, you know, we will monitor you for not just the words, but also your actions in terms of working closely with us on a partnership basis.
Yeah, and just to be very clear, I absolutely agree with you. And as I say to you, I know from being a councillor how important that is previously. And, you know, as I've said to you, and Catherine could attest to this as well, is that I've been very clear with officers since day one to make sure that any invitation of any event that I do go to, all the local decision makers, including assembly members, are invited. If that hasn't happened, I'll pick that up with the team. But obviously that's going to be my intention as I move forward.
Well, we'll look forward to being invited to things then. Previously, the Mayor said that there's going to be an updated environment strategy. The last one was out to consultation during 2016 and 17 and was signed off in May by us in May 2018. Obviously, that's now considerably out of date. Do you have any information that you can share with us on plans for updating the London Environment Strategy? What's the timetable?
So as I've come into my role, my focus has been on developing a framework for how we could deliver on our manifesto priorities for London. That's what we're elected to, well, that's what the Mayor is elected to deliver on. And my focus is on delivering on the manifesto priorities. As I understand, the GLA more broadly is going through a process of developing the mandates in line with GLA structures and the sort of programme delivery boards. As of when we get to the next stage on that, we'll be in a much more clearer position about how and what options we have around the London Environment Strategy for me to be able to update the committee.
Okay, so that's something that you would be able to write to us with that information when you're clearer on that timetable.
That's correct, yeah.
Okay. Beyond the environment strategy, will you and the wider, what work will you be delivering with the wider GLA group? I mean, obviously there's the GLA itself, but there's the rest of the GLA family. So what would you be expecting to be delivered across the rest of the GLA family? Have you entered those discussions yet?
Yes, so I've met with TfL to talk about the Mayor's expectations around how we can reach a zero-emission bus fleet by 2030, and we've been talking about that. We've also been talking about how we could unlock more resources around investment into sustainable urban drainage systems across London. The SUD that I visited in Tolworth and Kingston was partly funded through TfL through a regeneration project that was done nearby, and so we're very keen aligned to sort of make sure that we're able to deliver on that. I've also met with other deputy mayors as well. So one of the things that I really want to bring to my role, and that's one of the things that I achieved in Hackney, is that this role is cross-cutting. In order for us to really reach net zero, we have to make sure that we're able to deliver, as you say, across the whole family. So whether that's the Met Police, TfL, and other sort of members of the group, we're able to sort of do that. And those are conversations that I'll continue to engage in.
The London Nature Recovery Strategy is now a responsibility of the GLA. We've already asked some questions of various officers during the early part of this year. It's due to be completed by 2025. We've had some interesting discussions with other deputy mayors about by 2025. Does that mean January or does that mean December? It would be nice to hear from you how that's progressing and how ambitious are we going to be in the London Nature Recovery Strategy?
So the strategy is very much the sort of the baseline and very much the sort of floor to what we want to achieve in London. That's why the Mayor's been very ambitious around our plan in the manifesto around the Green Routes Fund and how we could create access for green spaces and to nature, to reconnect nature to Londoners, and that's what we're sort of currently working on to sort of co-produce and co-design that, working together with Londoners, and that's why it was great to have that event on Tuesday, which was the start of that conversation. So we're very clear that we want to go beyond just the sort of statutory services of the GLA. In relation to the local nature recovery strategy, I believe there's already been a consultation with some London boroughs. I think City of London has engaged together with Natural England too. We've also just launched a interactive map to help inform our draft strategy, which I believe will be published to go out for consultation in spring 2025. But Catherine can confirm around the dates.
That's right. And for another 10 days or so, the map will be open if anybody wants to indicate areas of London which they think have got good potential for nature recovery and tell us which sort of species would be particularly suitable. So please do share that with your constituents.
So will we be expecting you to support the protections that currently lie over metropolitan open land and the green belt? I mean, you were talking about being cross-cutting and talking to the Deputy Mayor for Planning about protections for these areas. I mean, most of us in our constituencies, and obviously Assemblymember Polanski from the London-wide basis, we know that CPRE, for example, the Council Protection of Rural England London branch, has identified 50 sites that are at great risk. Is that something that we can expect you to be standing up and defending?
Absolutely, and those are conversations that I've already been engaging with my peers, with my colleague deputy mayors. We want to see biodiversity and nature flourish in our city, and I think there's lots of opportunities on how we can do that. Obviously, as conversations sort of progress with the London Plan, those are sort of exactly the sort of representations that I'll be making.
I'm going to pass back to the Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You mentioned briefly there meetings with TfL, and you also mentioned Tolworth. Can I just ask, what part does traffic reduction play in your plans?
So traffic reduction is an important part of helping us reach our environmental objectives and, of course, our net zero targets for 2030. Of course, we obviously have a deputy mayor for transport who obviously leads TfL and on that engagement. My role specifically is to make sure that we're able to keep on track with our net zero targets and to make sure that we're able to push those ambitions. And that's exactly what I've been doing in conversations with both the Deputy Mayor for Transport but also for TfL. So whether it's around making sure that we've got, adequate, secure bike parking spaces by working together with boroughs to deliver that, to make sure that we're able to, create alternative ways and make Londoners feel safe to take other forms of transport, whether it's in terms of making sure that we're helping improve the bus network, again, to provide as an alternative and help buses flourish in London, and making sure that there's sort of electric buses. That's really important for us as well. So that's the sort of case I'll be continuing to make.
Thank you. Assemblymember Prince.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon. So what do you see in your role as the Deputy Mayor as the biggest challenges ahead of you?
Great question. I think the biggest challenge in my role, well, I actually think there's a massive opportunity here in the sense, and I'll come to the specific challenging points, but one of the great things about the last 7 weeks has been, one is the people you meet in terms of expertise, right? Like, even yourselves, including this room, like, I really want to work with you to make sure that we're able to deliver on that, because you've all got a wealth of experience that we can learn from to make sure that we're able to deliver on that. I've been meeting so many people over the past 7 weeks who've just got so many great ideas around how we could tackle the climate crisis. But again, even when we talk about tackling the climate crisis, it's got to be around how we make sure that we accelerate opportunities for Londoners. Obviously, it's important to preserve our planet and to save our planet, but there's also so much opportunities that come with the green transition, and that's one of the key things that I've been pushing out. The key challenge is obviously is going to be around how we can collaborate to really effectively accelerate the transition to net zero, and that's really important because, of course, the Mayor doesn't have all the powers by himself or doesn't have direct control over all emissions in London, and that's why that collaboration point is really important. I think boroughs are really important in this conversation. That's why I've been meeting lots of counterparts either here at City Hall. I've also set up a meeting with the London's Transport Environment Committee to make sure that we're talking to borough leaders and to borough representatives around how we can effectively work together around both aligning our visions, understanding how we can support them, but also around the sort of the impact framework and the delivery of that. But also, again, how do we work with business? We know that business, are looking for. The other day I spoke at Business London event, and one of the things that was very clear from the businesses in the room is that, they want to invest in clean, green energy, but they want a framework for how they can make sure that they're able to do that and understand how we're able to support them. So I think there's a big role for us to play in terms of coordinating, engaging, and really convening that, and that's exactly what I intend to do in my role.
Okay, thank you. Well, there's one challenge. So I'm sure you're familiar with the London Climate Resilience Report, and there's a number of recommendations that were made in that, and the Mayor has certainly indicated that he agrees with the vast majority of those recommendations. Recommendation 2 says work collaboratively to develop an adaptation delivery plan to support London's strategic vision and lead an exercise to map roles and responsibilities. I assume that, I might be wrong, falls in your lap. I just wondered if you'd had an opportunity to make any progress on that. I know you've only been doing it for 7 weeks. So.
No, great question. I actually had Emma Howard-Boyd here last week. We met and discussed the review that she led on, which was commissioned by the Mayor. The Mayor's been very clear about accepting all the recommendations and delivering on it. And what I've been doing over the past 7 weeks, Assembly Member, has been working with the team at GLA to understand how we're able to deliver across these recommendations. And in due course, we'll have updates on specific recommendations. And I'm also happy to write to the committee if ever you request, or to come back here again to talk about the update in relation to how we're progressing with the recommendations.
So when do you think that will be, when you're in a position to give us an update?
I think the key thing to note here, and Catherine can elaborate too, but a lot of these recommendations will be built into sort of the programme delivery board of the programme delivery at the GLA. So some of them will happen at different stages of the term. They won't all happen at once. So I think, of course, it's for you as the committee and also for the chair to decide in terms of how you would like me to respond. I'm always happy to do written updates from your meeting basis, or whenever I come next to the meeting, we can always have a section where we specifically report back on what recommendations have been progressed and haven't, and any challenges that we're facing around that.
Well, I think what would be nice, I mean, Chair may wish to comment, is if perhaps you committed to, say, a written quarterly update on your progress on this.
If the committee...
Because I accept, sorry,
sure.
I don't know being rude, I accept that some of them are much longer term and some of them are shorter term, but it wouldn't be too difficult to say, you know, on recommendation 2 we've done this and we're here and so on, so that we could have a quarterly. I don't know, Chair, if you think that's...
If you're happy to commit to that, that would be great.
I mean, as I say, yeah, we're obviously in the process of, you know, defining a lot of these recommendations to sort of fit into our delivery. But as I said, you know, I really want to help make sure that I'm supporting you in your role. So if the committee would like to request a sort of quarterly update, whether it's written or when I come here for you to ask me questions, I'm more than happy to do that.
That would be great. Thank you.
I haven't finished, sorry.
Sure.
Thank you. I've got one more, but thank you. That's really really helpful, actually. I think you may have touched on it, but recommendation 32 says here, continue work on the development of sub-regional integrated water management strategies, known as the IWMS, and convene partners to deliver the East London pilot strategy. As my constituency is in East London, or London East as we prefer to call it, I would obviously have quite an interest in that, and if you are planning to visit either Redbridge or Havering, I'd love to come along. I think you might possibly give out an invitation now. There are a number of issues in my patch around water. There's issues around flooding, and even we have an issue with waste effluents coming up out in the middle of the road, which obviously we're dealing with Thames Water with that, but there are a number of issues. So it would be useful to meet with you and to discuss those issues, and also I'd be very interested to know what your delivery plan is for East London, because as you quite rightly said, the Mayor doesn't have overall control of all these things, so it is a case of bringing the partners together, which is, you know, thankfully some power that the Mayor does have to bring. So I just wondered if you'd had made any progress on that, or if not, what your intentions are, please.
No, thank you for raising that, Assembly Member, and I think that's one of the reasons why I really want to make sure that we work closely with each and every one of you on the committee, because you'll all be very much more closer to the issues on the ground, and you obviously bring a lot of experience from those. So I would love to meet with you and take you up on the offer to meet with you to talk about those specific issues and take that away with officers to make sure that we're able to get the answers and the support that you need to deliver for your residents.
Very grateful, thank you.
Thank you. We've got 10 minutes left with the Deputy Mayor, and I've got 2 supplementaries from Assemblymember Tyrrell and Assemblymember Foos, if they're quick. Assemblymember Tyrrell.
Thank you very much, Mr Chairman. Good afternoon, Mr Deputy Mayor. Sticking with the London Climate Resilience Report for a moment, can I just ask which of the priorities you feel is the highest priority?
I think for us, in relation to the priorities that have been set out, there's a number of things there that are really important, but you know, Emma was when I met her, she was very clear that, you know, there were equally as priority for London. We spoke about, you know, lots of aspects around how we work with Londoners, a shared mission for London, all of the sort of different priorities that she set out, and, you know, we want to sort of be in a position from the Mayor's perspective to be able to deliver on all of those equally. And, you know, in the forthcoming months and years, hopefully we'll be able to deliver on all of the recommendations.
Thank you for that answer. Now, just continuing with the report, there's about 25 recommendations in there that relate directly to City Hall and about a further 15 or so that relate to the government. Have you had any meetings yet with the Secretary of State or ministers to discuss these recommendations and their implementation?
So I've had a number of meetings with government. So last week I went to meet with Minister Miatta Fahnbulleh around retrofit for London and how we can make sure that we're able to accelerate the retrofit that we need in London to make sure that we're delivering warmer homes for our residents and helping protect some of our most vulnerable residents. I had a meeting with Steve Reed through the UK Mayors Network, where we slightly touched upon the London Resilience Review. It was in a meeting with lots of other mayors too, so it was very limited time to be able to discuss that. I haven't had a specific meeting with government to specifically discuss the review, but one of the things that I've been speaking to the chair about of the review is around how we could sort of engage with government to work together to deliver on that, and hopefully I will flesh that out over the next few weeks and months to make sure that we're able to also report back to the committee at the appropriate moment.
Thank you for that. And final question from me then on this is I echo what Assemblymember Prince said about the transparency and the need to report to keep Londoners updated on that. So on the theme of transparency, later during this meeting we're going to be talking about changing behaviours and how people need to adjust their behaviours to meet the needs of the environment. Over a 2-year period, you racked up 40,000 air miles. Will you be changing your behaviour to meet the environment need?
Yeah, look, I think I'm very clear that the majority of those flights relate to my previous role as Chief Executive of My Life, My Say, where we're standing up for young people across the country, but also globally to stand up for democracy. I don't make any apology for making sure that we're banging the drum for young people at some of the highest levels of institutions, including the United Nations and the White House. Coming into my specific role now, of course I'll be avoiding flights where I don't need to take any flights. Most of them, the ones that you previously mentioned, weren't for leisure. They were mainly for work. And where it's not possible to do that, then of course where it's related to my role with the GLA, I will of course engage in it. But the preference would be that we obviously are able to sort of lead by example, and that's something that I'm committed to.
Thank you. Nothing further, Chair.
Thanks. Assemblymember Hughes.
Thank you, Chair. Congratulations, Mate, on your new role, and looking forward to working with you closely in the next few years. You've mentioned in your opening piece around the circular economy, which was great to hear. We've also got the organisation, which of course is Re-London, which your predecessor sat on the board. What are your hopes in terms of utilising Re-London to achieve that really important goal of making London a circular economy city?
Yeah, thank you, Assemblymember. I think that's a great question because I've already met with Re-London quite a few times since I've become the Deputy Mayor. The circular economy is a big priority, was a big priority for me in Hackney and is a priority for me moving into my new role as the Deputy Mayor. I think Re-London has a huge role to play, especially with the new government now. Secretary of State Steve Reed, when I spoke to him the other day, was very keen on the circular economy and wants to sort of work together very closely with London. We have a conference as part of Circular Economy Week that Re-London is convening to, which I'd love to see some of you there, and we'll make sure that you get the invitations to come across to that. But I see myself to have a much more enhanced role with Re-London as we move forward. More details to that will sort of come in the forthcoming sort of months as we move forward. But yeah, I think Re-London is really important, and particularly in terms of how it helps support SMEs. We could see loads of SMEs popping up in this sector, so around that opportunity and the growth perspective that we spoke about before. But also the fact that when we think about our circular economy, there are lots of communities in London, for example, who have so many cultural ways where they're already embedded into sort of their lifestyles, and there's so much that we can learn around that. So I'm very keen and excited to be part of Re-London and making sure that we're able to really accelerate our plans around a circular economy for London.
Thank you very much. It's really good to hear. Thanks.
Thanks, Assemblymember Cooper.
Thanks, Chair. The London Partnership Board, the proposals indicate you will be the co-chair of the new Energy and Environment Mission Board for London. What are the next steps around this? How's that progressing?
Thank you, Assembly member. So I think the London Partnership Board recently discussed London's plan to obviously establish the 6 missions, one of which is the energy and environment. And I know that my role as DM is obviously being confirmed within that context, and obviously I'll want to support under my sort of brief as required. I think for the governance structures around these missions are still currently being established. So at this stage, I don't have much of an update in terms of the timeline and any further details.
So my follow-up question was about the members of the mission board and how they'll be chosen. So what you're saying is at the moment that's still not been clarified. Is that something you would be able to share with us when you get that information? And do you have a timeline on when these arrangements might become clear?
Sure, I'm happy to provide any information you need in relation to that. Once we get much more clarity around the establishing of the boards, then we could surely circulate that to the committee.
I think that would be appreciated by all of us. Thank you, Chair. I'll pass back.
Thank you. Assembly Member Bacon.
Assembly Member Baker.
Bacon.
Bacon.
Roberts,
Yeah.
maybe?
Robert, sorry. Just having a moment. I was like, why is everyone saying that? Assembly Member Roberts. Excuse me, Gareth.
I thought you said bacon and I couldn't understand what you were talking about, so I assume you meant Baker.
You mentioned that you've met with some government ministers since being appointed. You mentioned Steve Reid. Any others that we should be aware of?
Yes, so I met with Minister Steve Reid twice, one on the visit and one at a UK Mayor's meeting. I also met with Miata Fambula, who's the Minister for Energy Consumers, where we spoke about how we can work together to deliver on retrofit for London, which was a very productive meeting. And as we move forward, I'll be looking forward to engage with other ministers that's related to my portfolio to really deliver on the Mayor's manifesto priorities. We know that the government, London has been leading the way on net zero for the last 8 years, both here in the country and globally. And there's a lot that the government can work with us on to really accelerate, and also on their plans to reach net zero. And so that's something that we'll be keeping to push, whether that's around access to green space, nature, whether that's around how we can help accelerate net zero schools across our city, or whether that's around how we can make sure that we're able to clean our rivers. Those are all areas that I'll be looking to work with government ministers on to make sure that we're delivering for London.
Thank you. You mentioned you visited 15 London boroughs. I may have not seen the email regarding Tolworth, SUDS. But the individual boroughs themselves, do you have plans to go in and actually meet the leaders of the individual boroughs? And if you have, when do you expect to get those meetings finished by?
Yeah, so I've been meeting already with some of my former peers. So, for example, I met with the cabinet member for Lewisham for climate action, Louis Krupski, who came here to see me. I met with Councillor Rosina Chowdhury in Lambeth, Councillor Micah Carter, who's a cabinet member for climate action in Haringey. So I've been meeting lots of different...
forgive me, because I appreciate we're short on time. I'm thinking about the actual leaders of the councils.
Of course.
And going in for official meetings with them to discuss their priorities for their local areas.
That is what I've been setting out as part of. We've been reaching out to boroughs. What I'm trying to do is make sure that we get out to as many boroughs, not just for visits, but also for the point that you make. And hopefully over the next few weeks and months, I'll be able to meet with as many as I can. But if you've also got whether we could do that jointly in the constituencies that you represent, I'd be happy to do that too.
That would be good. I should declare an interest being a borough leader myself as well.
So are we talking about meeting the leader of Richmond?
The leader of Richmond, the leader of Kingston, the leader of Hackney, all of the leaders. Hounslow, all of these places. The one thing you mentioned, you've met Steve Reid twice. The Teddington Direct River Abstraction Scheme. Could you give us your quick views on that particular scheme, please?
Sorry, could you just repeat the
question? It's the Thames Water plans to put treated effluent into the River Thames.
If I may, the Mayor made his position on that clear in an answer to MQ in May this year.
Yes,
so
but I really was asking the Deputy Mayor there, Catherine.
Sure, I'll need to take that away and come back to you on that.
Okay, and one final question. We've seen that the Mayor's been prepared to blow his environmental credentials as the water of the Silvertown Tunnel, and with given the green light pretty much to the expansion of City Airport. A previous Mayor of London gave assurance that he would lay down in front of the bulldozers if there was any plans to expand Heathrow Airport. Now, we're hearing warm noises about Heathrow expansion from the Chancellor at the moment. Could you, or maybe on the Mayor's behalf, offer a similar offer to lie down in front of the bulldozers should they try to expand Heathrow?
Boris would have made a bigger obstacle.
This is true.
The Mayor's been very clear about his views on Heathrow expansion and expansion of airports generally, and that's our view around that.
But with respect, he was very clear about the expansion of City before he eventually gave the go-ahead for it by selling the land next to it.
Well, the go-ahead was given by government and Department for Transport on London City Airport.
But he sold the land.
The Mayor's made his view is very clear around Heathrow expansion, and obviously that's something that we'll continue to fight for Londoners.
We look forward to him changing his mind then. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Assembly Member Roberts. I got introduced as Zach Goldsmith on TV the other day, so I think I was getting my own back. On aviation, Meti, Scope 3 emissions. So the Committee on Climate Change are really clear that we need to reduce Scope 3 emissions. The Mayor is responsible for takeoff and landing. Would you like to see a Scope 3 target?
I think our priority right now, Zach, is around, Chair, sorry, is around how do we make sure that we lead by example, and what can we do within our powers to do that. I know that there are lots of individual boroughs who are working specifically around Scope 3 targets and what they're able to do around that and how they're able to work around behavioural change as well. That's part of the conversation that we're having with specific boroughs around how we can help support that. But my priority is to deliver on the manifesto commitments that have been set out, and the Mayor's priority is around how we can make sure that we clean our waterways, how we make sure that we're able to create green access space, but also around how we can accelerate clean green energy around London and what we can specifically do. This time is about delivery for London, and that's what I'm focused on. Of course, we want to work with Londoners around making sure that we're able to support them around their transition to net zero, and those are conversations that I've had with young people the other day, but we want to continue to have.
Isn't the problem with that, though, that aviation is in the Mayor's pathway?
The Mayor's pathway sets out, obviously, the aviation is a key part of it, but Scope 3 targets, specifically to what you're referring to, is we're not yet in a position to be able to sort of set a target for that. We want to be able to focus on what we can do as an authority, and that's what we're focused on at the moment.
Assemblymember McCartney.
Thank you. I'm just wondering, with working with the new government, who have obviously got a commitment to net zero and climate change, will you be having discussions, and do you know whether you require further devolution? And if so, what is it that you'll be asking for? I don't mind who answers it, and we have talked about this, Catherine, before, but is there anything particular that in your mind now you would like the new government to devolve?
I think those are conversations that are obviously currently happening between the GLA and the Mayor's office and obviously the government around sort of the broader piece around whether it's around what we're doing around the economy and the growth plan, what we're doing around sort of like, you know, accelerating jobs in our city, and obviously how we're able to make sure that we're delivering for London within the sort of the framework that's going to be set out through the missions and all of the sort of structures within that. We'll obviously be making our case to that, but my key priority, Assembly Member, is making sure that we're able to really focus on how do we make sure that we accelerate on areas like retrofit. We're able to deliver for Londoners. So that's where my focus has been in the last 7 weeks, is like looking at specific things that we could deliver over the next few years, that's going to really benefit Londoners.
Okay, thank you. I don't know, Catherine, whether you had anything to add to that.
Just to say that, of course, under the previous government, Greater Manchester and West Midlands were trailblazers. We've stayed in close contact with them to understand how that has been going. As the Deputy Mayor said, retrofit is absolutely key for reaching net zero 2030. So that's one of our key focuses with the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero. Thanks.
Lovely. I mean, previously we've talked about devolution of skills, particularly 16+ skills. And we were talking about the green economy and so forth. That's going to be essential. So I'm just wondering whether there's those linkages being made when we are making our devolution asks in future.
Yeah, for sure, and I can make sure that we make those representations through the Mayor's office.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne. Assemblyman McCartney, I'm really glad to hear you ask those questions. Thank you very much to the Deputy Mayor and Catherine Barber. I know we're going to see you back very soon, but you are now free to leave. Can I ask the committee to note the report and the discussion? Thank you. Can we also delegate authority to me as Chair in consultation with party group lead members to agree any output arising from this discussion? Agreed. Thank you. We'll now take a short adjournment. Thank you, and see you in 5 minutes. today's Environment Committee meeting, where we'll now move on to the first part of our investigation into building action on net zero. Today's discussion will be split into two panels, and I'm delighted to welcome our guests. For the first panel, we have Dr. Ashok Sinha, who is Chief Executive Officer at Ashton and Chair of the London Sustainable Development Commission. Welcome. And Tyrone Scott, who is Senior Movement Building and Activism Officer at War on Want. Welcome, Tyrone. So if I can ask the same question to both of you, and I'll start with you, Ashok. So it's nearly a decade on from the Paris Agreement, and it's 5 years since London declared a climate emergency. How are we doing, and what is the current state of progress on action to reduce climate emissions in London?
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you to the committee for inviting me to be present in this very important conversation, and I very much look forward to seeing what the conclusions of the investigation are going to be. But before I continue, may I add my tribute to Nikki Gavron. Nikki Gavron, quite outstanding, brilliant, innovative, creative, trailblazing servant of London, Deputy Mayor, Assembly Member and a member of this committee, and she represented this committee on the London Sustainable Development Commission for many years on behalf of the LSDC. We mourn her loss greatly and send our condolences to her family.
Well said.
I'd also like to thank Assemblymember Cooper for being the current representative of the Assembly on the LSDC and for her work on the Commission. So it's a really, really big question, Chair. We heard from the Deputy Mayor a moment ago that London is a leading city globally when it comes to decarbonisation, and I think that is true. And we have made a lot of progress. But let's also remember that while we may have decarbonised by about 50% compared to 1990, a lot of that has been driven by decarbonisation elsewhere. A lot of that has been driven by decarbonisation of the grid, and so we have benefited substantially from offshore wind farms in the North Sea in propelling our decarbonisation. That is not to say we haven't done a very good job in a number of areas. Active travel has expanded considerably over the past few years. We have seen increases in the availability of electric buses, for example. So there's been some movement on transportation, and there have been initiatives in various areas from solar deployment in London and in relation to retrofit. However, while we may be in a good place statistically now, we are a long way short of having the frameworks and the funding and the programs and the partnerships, and I would say the collective leadership across all of our sectors and all sectors of government to complete the remainder of the decarbonisation. Within the Mayor's preferred pathway, Accelerated Green, the name of the pathway is, that's a 78% reduction in carbon emissions by 2030. So it's not total decarbonisation. There's still 22% out there that needs to be accounted for, even if we're successful. OK, hold on that. That means we've got to do more than half again of the decarbonisation that we've achieved since 1990, and we've got to do it in little over 5 years. So we have a massive challenge ahead of us, and we need to find a way of navigating that.
Thank you. I think you've set out the challenge really well there. Tyrone, so if I can come to you, how do you think we're doing? Is there anything to add?
Yeah, thank you. And again, thanks for inviting us here today. And yeah, we work for War on Want, and we work both here in the UK and with partners across the world to fight against the root causes of inequality and injustice. And I guess over the last few years, it's become even more prevalent and clear that the climate crisis, the ecological crisis, is one of the driving factors of inequality and injustice, not just across the world, but also increasingly here in the UK. There's much to welcome in regards to London's work to cut emissions. We've definitely recognised and value the reduction in the target to 2030 from the initial target of 2050, which is still being used by many policymakers in governments across the world and in the UK. So seeing London commit to 2030 targets is very much welcomed. We also welcome within the policies the recognition that the GLA would seek to build public consensus around the urgent changes needed to tackle climate change and achieve a green economy, but also the recognition and that urgency and ambition go hand in hand with social justice, which is a big part of, I guess, the work that we are looking to put forward. And a big part of that for us is with equity. And as you're all well aware, it's not all of London's citizens who bear the greatest responsibility. Not only is it that the richest 10% of the people in the world account for half of global emissions, but that within that, it's the top 1% whose net worth exceeds $30 million globally, who account for 17% of global emissions, which is what Oxfam's report, Survival of the Richest, set out. And it's that richest 1% of Britons, many of them residents in London, who hold more wealth than 70% of Britons combined. And the reason we say this is relevant is, as Thomas Piketty, the renowned economist, has said in his latest work on climate and inequality, the effort to cut emissions has to be distributed in a way that can be accepted by the population. And as such, questions of social and economic class must be at the centre of our responses to the climate crisis, to address the huge inequalities between carbon footprints of the rich and the less well-off, to prevent resistance to climate policies. And the reason we bring this forward is because of examples here in London. So pretty everyone here knows about low traffic neighbourhoods, which is a policy that we support completely in theory, but there has been a growing sentiment that those who have benefited from that have been from a particular class, and there's a growing sentiment that those who still are suffering from the, in some cases, it's perceived as higher emissions, is those who are working class. And following on that report, he went on to say the biggest failure of environmental policies has been the tendency to ignore the class dimension and failing to address the concerns of poor people within rich countries amid rising social and economic inequality. So with this, I guess, just with these policies, it's not in regards to the policies themselves, it's just ensuring that they're presented in a way that keeps ordinary Londoners on board. Otherwise, we fight the risk of people not being behind the policies that are put forward, which makes it so much harder to seek where we want to get with our goals in cutting emissions.
Thank you. Yeah, that communications piece is so important. Assemblymember Mahfouz.
Thank you, Chair. And I think just follow up on what you just said there, Tyrone, it's really powerful. Clearly, there is a huge challenge in terms of making sure that we bring people together with us as we face this climate crisis. And what we've seen in the last few years is 3 Prime Ministers, at least 5 Ministers for the Environment in the last 4 years, flip-flopping and inconsistency in terms of messaging around the importance of the environment and some of those universal truths that we know should hold and should be put forward by our leaders at national government. How do you feel that has impacted on London and in terms of being able to make that progress towards net zero?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it definitely does have an impact. And when there is a constant change in, I guess, decision makers, which can lead to a constant change in the policies that are put forward and the narrative behind those policies, it makes it very difficult for, again, ordinary residents to get behind what these changes are, especially as that narrative is continuously sort of moving and adapting. So we very much hope that moving forward, I guess, there may be a period of stability which will allow the GLA and the London Mayor to work with government to be able to find a sort of collaborative narrative and be able to work to build that within communities rather than having that rhetoric sort of changing every 6 to 12 months, which we think makes it really difficult for ordinary residents to get behind. So, yeah, in the short answer, very much hope that a period of stability will allow time for policies to both be implemented, to be accepted, and, yeah, for that narrative to build through communities.
Very happy to add support everything Tyrone has said. I think I would love us to move forward from some of the toxicity that characterised the debates over net zero and decarbonisation in recent times. One of the most important reasons why we have been able to achieve the successes that we have achieved to date in the UK and in London has been cross-party consensus and a collaborative, constructive approach when it comes to the dialogue about how we overcome the undoubted challenges towards that we face in achieving a society, a London that lives within the carrying capacity of this planet. The carrying capacity of this planet for life is finite, and the laws of physics are setting a very demanding timetable for us. And we cannot afford to do anything other than move forward on the basis of cooperation, dialogue. Yes, there'll be disagreements over policy and priorities, but we've got to navigate a way through that without deliberately setting up dividing lines and putting people into opposing camps and inhibiting the kind of conversations that will be absolutely essential to building building salience and political space and legitimacy and ownership and accountability for the transition.
And on that, in terms of tackling the climate crisis, and we know it's a crisis, we know we need to move quickly on it. We also know that the worst effects of the climate crisis are seen abroad. In many parts of, we talked, Tyrone, very powerfully earlier about the impact on poverty, and we see that, of course, internationally, perhaps more so than in London directly. But as we need to bring people with us as we take this forward, and we've been very ambitious in terms of achieving the target for net zero in London by the end of this decade rather than by the end of 2050, what are the benefits of achieving that at a far earlier stage and driving that forward in London? So what are the benefits of achieving net zero in London by 2030 as opposed to 2050, which is the UK target?
Let me address that by looking at the broad point to begin with. I think it is worth remembering that when we talk about net zero 2050 globally and and in terms of the UK, we're actually looking at a probability assessment. That is an assessment that of the pathway, the net zero pathway to 2050 is consistent with a 50% chance of limiting global heating globally to 1.5 degrees C. Okay? So there are a number of reasons for accelerating action if we can, whether it's by London or anybody else. The first one is the consequences of global heating being above 1.5 degrees C are so severe that a 50-50 chance of keeping us to below 1.5 degrees C doesn't seem like the kind of odds that I would like to champion with the next generation of Londoners. The second point is that we are behind the curve globally and the UK, and we could be behind the curve in London unless we take the action necessary to stay on a 1.5 degrees trajectory. If that continues, it means we need to work harder in future years because we cannot take out the excess carbon dioxide above the curve that we will have emitted. So for reasons of hedging our bets and safeguarding our future and giving ourselves the best chance of avoiding catastrophic climate change and playing catch up because we are falling behind nationally and not on the right trajectory globally, it makes sense to accelerate action now and bring targets forward.
Yeah, I mean, I completely echo those sentiments, and it can be difficult to find something to add, but I really do agree with that. And even some of the models, when we're looking to rely on to frame net zero, they're often relying on sort of unproven or potentially dangerous technologies, which sort of allow us to continue acting within the same way in the hopes that these technologies exist to then alleviate us from this crisis. And we really hope that public policy makers really will not be accepting models based on probabilities of 66% or at worst cases 50%. And the reason of this is, elected members would not be willing to vote or make public policy decisions on the example, say, safety of our trains or safety of our buses if there was a 1 in 3 chance or a 1 in 2 chance that they might crash. And sometimes the perceived abstract nature of the climate, environmental, ecological crisis, because so much is the worst effects are happening right now outside of our shores, means that sometimes urgency is not quite there. So again, not to equate it to the same as bus or train safety, but at the same time, this is something that is going to be an increasing threat to never mind our lives, our way of life, and our ability to live free and with dignity. And I think that's such an important key aspect in any of our climate policies, is ensuring that people can continue to live free and with dignity. And really the starting point for public policy should therefore be both sort of real zero, but also equity, both within London, also as part of our fair shares of global efforts. And as Ashok says, this is so fundamentally important because we are already seeing, even within the UK, more extreme weather events, more extreme heat, which are only going to continue. So by implementing policies now that mean that homes can be retrofitted, insulation is there, there's accessible transport. So we don't wait until we're seeing the worst effects to act when it's too late, and it's ensuring that we act now, so then residents and citizens are we've already adapted to a crisis that is coming.
Thank you both, and I appreciate in terms of your roles, you very much are big picture. So one of the challenges, of course, for many Londoners, as I say, is with the challenges of the climate crisis, they may not necessarily feel that it's happening to them now, but what benefits will they see by London accelerating our programme to net zero by, within that 5.5-year period, Ashok, that we talked about?
That is a brilliant question, and it's good to be able to talk about the positives. It's good to be able to have the chance to talk about the kind of better, fairer, more equitable, more prosperous London that we can create through this societal and economic transformation that will be unprecedented in human history. That's what we are talking about, completely rekitting and retooling our society and our economy, the way we travel, the homes we live in, our work patterns, the way we eat, the way we enjoy our leisure time, and our relationship with the natural world. It is a whole society, systems level change. But it brings with it huge opportunities for people to live better lives. So if we have, and you know this is completely obvious, this has been told and talked about so many times, if people have warmer, drier homes, their energy bills are lower, their health is better. If people are able to get around by walking, cycling and public transport, again, those active lives help them achieve healthier lives, and usually that will be more cheap than owning a metal box that sits outside the drive or on the road for 90% of the time, hemorrhaging funds in petrol costs and whatnot. And there is an opportunity if we get it right, and this is the heart of the just transition for me. It's not just about protecting people who are moving from fossil fuel intensive industries to green industries and not repeating the mistakes of the 1980s when whole communities were thrown to the wolves, when the coal industry was shut down. It's not just about moving jobs from one place to another. It's about looking at our city and the most disadvantaged, the poorest, and saying, who will have the new jobs of the future? Who will have access to the capital needed to be the new entrepreneurs? Who will be the new leaders in designing and shaping the transition to this new economy? There are all sorts of ways in which Londoners can be made healthier, cost of living reduced, leadership chances curated, opportunities for business and enterprise curated for those who need it most and who have had access to those things least in the past. It's a massive social justice improvement opportunity.
Thank you. Tyrone, I'm just going to pause it for now. Just to reiterate what you're saying there, Ashok. So healthier, better quality lives, money going further, tackling the poverty and better opportunity across London by moving to 2030.
And I may say also a better quality of life.
Absolutely.
Through the greening and better access to green and blue spaces. We will also contribute, yes, to biodiversity enhancement and carbon sequestration and improved air quality, but we will be happier and our well-being will be improved.
Fantastic. Looking forward to it. So just one on the flip side of that, in terms of perhaps, Tyrone, the risks of trying to deliver this earlier, this target by 2030 rather than 2050?
I think it depends largely on the types of policies that are implemented. If it's decarbonisation and purely decarbonisation for decarbonisation's sake, as it were, then there are huge risks that the policies aren't there designed to make people's lives actually better. So they have to go hand in hand with other things as well. And to reiterate this, the climate scientists in the IPCC AR6 report concluded that only a compact on poverty and climate would be able to win the social licenses for the changes needed. And they also go on to say that demands around inequality such as living wages, social protection, universal public services, including the right to education and health, were themselves key adaptive measures needed to build the resilience of people and societies to the inevitable consequences of climate violence. So I think that the risk is, if it is just pure decarbonisation policy for decarbonisation's sake, it's not looking at the impact of communities, it's not looking at social protections, the transition to different new industries and jobs, ensuring that these are well-funded, protected, unionised jobs, public sector jobs, and it's not just about, reducing emissions no matter what the impact is on regular people and their lives, and communicated in a way that is, you're going to have to lose this or give up this, rather than framing it in the correct way, which is your lives will improve because, yeah, cleaner air, access to green spaces. But again, access to green spaces within itself, that doesn't necessarily become a policy just if you just concentrate on decarbonisation. So again, it has to go hand in hand with these other social policies. So yeah, that's the biggest risk, I think, if it's just a blinkered approach to we need to reduce carbon no matter anything else, because I don't think we'll ever get the public backing to be able to push forward with those policies if you don't see the benefits of them.
I think you've hit the nail really on the head there, because given particularly the cost of living crisis, actually tackling both poverty hand in hand with tackling the climate crisis is the way to go forward. If you had the chance to sort of stare down the barrel to Steve Reed as the Environment Minister now, and had maybe two asks each of the national government going forward, what would they be? Let's start with Ashok.
That's a tricky one, because I'd like to make the ask not of Steve Reed, but of the Chancellor. If I may segue onto the Chancellor after starting with Steve Reed. The big challenge that we are committed to trying to address when it comes to what's in his brief is protecting 30% of nature by 2030. So I would like to see from Steve early announcements on how we're going to be able to redouble our efforts to achieve that in the UK, and what he would do in partnership with London to achieve that within London itself as well. I think broadly speaking, this is about the UK. We lack the kind of land use policy that is required for the future. Our land needs to feed us, it needs to sequester carbon, it needs to support biodiversity, it needs to provide jobs, it needs to be accessible to the population. That is a hard challenge, and when I say land, I'm talking about our coastal areas as well. So we need a genuine land use policy that genuinely integrates and optimizes across all of the many different demands that we have on land use, and is not simply sector specific, which is what has often happened. If you were the Chancellor, I would say one thing in particular, which is the public purse cannot pay for decarbonisation, certainly not at the rate that it is required, which means that we're going to need enormous quantities of private sector finance to go into new infrastructure improvements, and all of the new industries and all of the new programs like retrofitting nationally, heat pumps, that will be required for decarbonisation. And it isn't a massive cost. The latest report from the Grantham Institute 6 months ago or something like that said we could invest at the speed and scale necessary if 1% of GDP was spent through the public purse, by the public purse, leveraging another 2% of private finance. If we were prepared to spend it, and if we were prepared to put in the architecture necessary, I say the architecture, you've got to somehow go from those billions and hundreds of billions to the tens of thousands that are required for each individual, let's say, heat pump installation. So it does require a lot of architecture and capacity building. But I would say to Rachel Reeves, be bold, be ambitious. Our future well-being and our economy is at stake. This is a bargain basement investment when it comes to costs. You know, it's so cheap in the long run, and the benefits are so enormous.
Yeah, I mean, I'd really like to, again, I feel like I'm not just going to agree with everything being said and try and add something else to it as well. But yeah, really agree, particularly in the private financial investment as well. Because there's one key thing that I'd want to say, and actually even to the GLA really, is that cutting emissions with one hand, but whilst giving a green light to the most polluting companies, not only fossil fuel giants like Shell, the mining industry, where London is home to the second biggest concentration in the world, and the giants and who finance them, again, many headquartered here in London, being able to continue not only business as usual, but accelerate a greater expansion of their investments and their operations here within London and within the UK. And I know, you know, many of you here will be thinking that regulating the City of London or regulating these businesses are beyond the remit of the GLA. But if the GLA, the voices of London citizens, it isn't at the forefront of calling for those multinationals who are amassing billions in profit from doing their fair share of action, then those who are whispering in the ear of small businesses or people within communities that it is they who are paying the price for action on climate, those voices will only grow louder. You know, if London was a country, it would be the 22nd biggest in the world with a gross value of $546 billion a year. There's so much money flowing through the capital city right now, and so much of this money is tied up in heavily polluting industries that are not adequately taxed, not adequately, I guess, made to pay their fair share for the impacts of a climate crisis. So if I can say anything to central government, but even to the GLA for their power still as an influencer of central government, is to enact policies that don't put the burden, and especially the financial burden, on ordinary people, citizens, residents, workers, non-workers, whatever it might be, and recognise that it's the institutions that we allow in our country to profit, obviously driving a lot of this. And also what that will do is negate, again, some of those voices that can seem like we're hypocritical in our policy making, you know, by allowing some people to continue and not expecting a financial burden from them, but then expecting that from ordinary residents and expecting them to make the change.
Thank you both. And final question from me, and just if you could be very, very quick, because I appreciate there are other questions to get through as well. So if you're asking for one thing to be devolved from central government to us here at the London Assembly and the GLA, what would that be?
I'll go back to the financial point. London needs to be able to retain and raise the finance necessary to be able to pump prime the kind of private investment that is needed to deliver hundreds of billions of pounds, which is what will be required over the course of the next 5-10 years to decarbonise. Give us the powers. Sounds great. Taro?
If I can't use that one, I'd use housing. We have quite an ambitious. I think the mayor's quite ambitious on what he wants to achieve with housing, and when he speaks about retrofitting and installation is good. I know there's members of the GLA who speak really, really well on housing and really passionate about it, but I also know in some ways hands are quite tied sometimes with central government policy. So I think if housing was to be devolved and it was dealt with responsibly, then we could do an adequate programme of both house building that is carbon neutral and is well insulated, and also the retrofitting programmes. So yeah, housing. Sorry, I know it's a short answer, so I'll just keep short.
Thank you very much. I've got supplementaries in a moment from Assemblymember Thomas and Assemblymember Roberts, and I'm going to hand back to Assemblymember Foos for the Just Transition section. My quick question, I'll start with you, Tyrone, so you don't have to keep following Ashok, is you talked about unionised jobs. How important are the unions in this whole picture, and how important is it to place workers, presumably, at the centre of all of this?
Yeah, really good question. I think unions are paramount to being able to achieve a genuine just transition, because the unions are so representative of so many of our workers across particularly the public sector and increasingly more private sector workers as well. And if there is a lack of belief that a transition will be just, that jobs will be protected, that it will be equitable, then it's very, very difficult for the unions and union members or leadership to get behind policies which could in effect sound like that they're going to lose their jobs, lose their industries, no guarantees of how their skills are going to be retrained or whatever it might be. So, yeah, I think it's so imperative to be working with unions from the offset about designing policies that work with them in regards to transitions, and also because it means we don't make assumptions about what it is that workers want as well, because sometimes, and I know this from working within unions, there's many workers who work within heavily polluting industries who would like to enact change, who would be very, very keen to find a way to start decarbonising their industries or potentially retrain and move into another industry as well. So, yeah, not making those assumptions about workers, but also really working with unions to make these policies from the offset.
Thank you. Ashok, would you like to add anything?
Very, very briefly. I think the example of what Poland has put forward in terms of the Just Transition Plan for its coal industry is instructive. There has been a deep dialogue between government and the unions in the coal sector in Poland, which has led to an agreement around the phase-out of all coal extraction in Poland by 2049. That's a great example of how, with strong unions representing important industries, acting in partnership with progressive, sensible governments, we can really make progress and achieve. I think we're going to talk about it, a just transition.
Thank you. Assemblymember Tyrrell.
Thank you, Chair. Thinking about the 2030 net zero target thing at the moment, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 0 being no chance and 10 being absolutely, how likely are we to hit it?
I don't know. I've rushed to press the button. It's a tough question, and it obviously depends on still policies that are going to be enacted. We're only at 2024, and there's still a lot that can be done. You don't want to appear negative and say the chances could be relatively low. You also don't want to appear unrealistic and overly optimistic by saying 10 will achieve them by 2030. And it might actually be some way in the middle, but I think there's a real importance in aiming for that target very, very clearly, loudly, vocally, and using that target to allow London to be a leader in driving the action that's needed to tackle this climate crisis. But I'm struggling to put a number on it, so I'm interested.
I'm struggling to hear a number in this.
So I'm going to put it this way. Do nothing, just continue, not do nothing, just continue what we are doing, we're at the 2s or 3s. So it depends. It is totally contingent on what we now see coming through from this mayoralty and from this government and from the current council leadership and the new council leaderships that will be elected in 2 years' time, if I'm correct. I am not a soothsayer, so I cannot predict what the dispositions of all of those decision makers are. But if they take the right decisions, those chances could go right up to 8 or 9.
Yeah, thank you for that, because obviously my big concern is that if we fail to hit it, the 2030 target, or we have to delay it, that there's going to be a lot of lost credibility there for then it comes to the next wave of policies. So I think, as you say, it's important that we hit this target. You just mentioned the boroughs, which was actually going to be my next question. Obviously, the boroughs it's a completely inconsistent approach. Even when you look at the council, so the council I sit on, Bromley Council, has a target to be net zero by 2027. But within that is only the council as an organisation. So looking then at how we can actually get a bit of consistency in there, what incentives do you think the Mayor and City Hall could be offering councils to make sure they're both setting targets and meeting them?
Yeah, that's a really tricky one, because there isn't, the amount of money, for example, if we talk about financial incentives, the amount of money that are available to the GLA, and this goes back to the point I was making earlier about London having some wherewithal to be able to bring in more finance and then being able to support boroughs in a coordinated way. Okay, that doesn't exist now. So the amount of financial incentive that can be given to boroughs is relatively low. And the thing that really concerns me about boroughs, okay, I'm going sideways from this question for a second, is the fact that boroughs and councils across the country have suffered so much in their capacity. They've been eviscerated for over a decade and are struggling just to meet statutory obligations, which has left them without the personnel, the institutional knowledge, and therefore the capacity to be able to be the guiding mind for local programs, retrofitting, solar, district heating, greening, shared mobility. And I honestly don't, so you can create incentives, but if the councils themselves lack the capability to deliver because of this historical lack of funding and through austerity and so on, then we're a bit stuck. You possibly will know better than me on the best way to recreate that capability at the council level, but I don't think that's going to be within the gift of the GLA. I think that is a conversation between central government and local authorities. But I do see that capacity gap and capability gap as being a really big problem.
Yeah, again, agree. And one of the notes I've written down here is capacity, and that's a key thing, because you do see these different targets across London, 27. I'm sure there might even be a council that's got 25. Yeah, exactly, which is brilliant, and it's really, really commendable. But of course, then in effect, you may have also tied yourself in knots, because 2025 is now a year away. So
25.
Yeah, they've got a lot of work to do, but I commend it. But Oh gosh, yeah, I'm talking about this time next year. We'll give them till this time next year, as benefit of the doubt. But with that, I think potentially though, because I think it's still great that these ambitious targets exist, but this may be a result of, initially in a few years ago, maybe the targets from the Assembly weren't quite radical enough, maybe, should I say, and now it is 2030 as a target. So maybe there's something which would be beneficial from a consistency across the city, which is not necessarily those who've got 25 or 27 targets, regressing and saying, okay, we got it wrong, but really this only will work with a coordinated effort and a coordinated plan. And the incentivization for local boroughs, I don't think is necessarily like financial as it were, but more the vision, the plan, the program of work that local authorities can do by providing those resources, by providing a bit of additional capacity, because the capacity is what's lacking so much within local authorities to enact what it is they set out to achieve in that first place. So I think a coordinated London plan that works specifically across all the boroughs so we can all reach that common target of 2030 would be a strong incentive for councils to both work together, work with the GLA and work towards a unified goal.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Roberts.
Thank you. Hello. I'm just going to warm a bit to the theme of earlier about airport expansion. And we're seeing this happening. Luton is on the cards possibly for next year, going from 19 to 32 million people going through a new terminal. Heathrow is there on the cards. We've already seen about City. And we're hearing that the Chancellor is looking at these as being drivers of economic growth. However, in order to try to stimulate the economy, because it's been absolutely trashed. Are these types of measures, in your view, compatible with being able to reach our net zero goals? And which is more important, the economic growth in order to deliver net zero, or just getting on with net zero without the necessary drive towards economic growth? I know that's a chicken and egg thing, but how do we do it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's safe to say in general, we as an organisation, aren't for the expansion of airports, and very rarely would we see the benefit of this, especially to wider society, and that includes most recently, we were active in the resistance to the expansion of City Airport, which obviously recently got the green light, and I guess it's this sort of, again, that blinkered approach to the economy and economic growth, and what does it mean about economic growth and purely in the value of GDP, when the value of the economy could also be about people's quality of life, people's happiness, and all these things are going to be quite negatively affected by this continued expansion, and whether that's the quality of lives of people who live in the surrounding area or the increased CO2 emissions. So I never buy into the argument that we need to grow economically to be able to enact the climate policies. If growing economically means we're going to emit much more carbon and do even more intense damage to the environment, it seems incredibly contradictory. So, I don't see a way in which airport expansion is conducive to us being able to reach our goals of carbon neutrality by 2030 or 2050, actually, if we're going to continue to expand aviation in that way. I'll keep it short and sweet there.
So I agree with Tyrone, and I think the fact checkers in the room may back me up, I hope, that the Committee on Climate Change did say that we should not be expanding our airports further if we're going to be have a decarbonisation pathway consistent with the carbon budgets that it sets. I honestly, you're going to expect me to say this, you always predict, I'm sure, what I'm going to say. I don't think there is a contradiction. I think the greatest opportunities for jobs, enterprise, growth, economic development are from the green economy, are from the green transition. I think the C40 cities put it very well. I can't remember exactly how they put it, but they say we are in a global race to net zero, and those cities that do best in that race will garner the greatest opportunities and the greatest economic benefits, and if those benefits are spent wisely, the greatest social benefits for their peoples. If I was Chancellor, I wouldn't presume to be, I would be looking for growth in other areas. And I'd also question that in the digital age, and this is completely obvious, right, but in the digital age, do we have to move around as much as we did previously in order to forge productive business relationships? Maybe fly less, stay longer, more quality in the engagement.
Thank you very much. Beautifully said. I've asked Assembly Member Mahfouz to finish in the next 5-10 minutes, which is next to impossible. So could I ask you both to be quite concise with your answers just in this last section? Assembly Member Mahfouz.
Thanks, Chair. So I first of all, I just got to say I'm a little bit disappointed that Assembly Member Roberts hasn't taken the opportunity to bat the chance that Assembly Member Turrell gave him around, as he's obviously indicated he was a leader of a council, to go in there and say he's going to be ambitious around this. But hey. Look, in recent years, obviously, we've seen the economy locally and internationally go in the wrong direction, and there's a real opportunity, as we've talked about that recovery being a green recovery and using innovation to be able to deliver a greener economy through that just transition. So we've got the London Sustainable Development Commission report into the just transition highlighted the need for a shared vision for net zero in London. So the first question, and again, just going back to the point that Zach, the Chair, made, we're going to be accelerating to 2030 in terms of achievement, so we'll accelerate in terms of the answers. What do you see as the role of the Mayor in setting and shaping a shared vision?
Critically important. Just to exemplify, when I pop onto my public transport, I've left my bike at work today, if I would just ask people in the carriages, do you know about net zero 2030? Do you know what it means? Do you know why we're decarbonising? Do you know what your role is? Do you know who's going to help us do this? Do you know what the benefits are of doing this? Do you know why we should all be working together, why it's better for all of us? I suspect the answers would not necessarily be that encouraging. And so I think we need leadership from everybody at the senior-most levels in government to lay out that vision for London, to engage Londoners in that vision, to not gloss over the challenges, but build consensus, build momentum, and help people feel that it's something they are part of and shaping and not subject to.
Yeah, very, very much agree. And just in short addition, yeah, the Mayor is so critical for that vision, but it's critical to create that vision for citizens and ordinary residents. But I think, back to the point earlier, I think it's also critical for the Mayor to bring that vision to council leaders, to policymakers across London, and try and create that consensus around that unified target, and a combined plan as how, working together in unison. Yes, I know that's a bit more of a monoculture in regards to the parties in power, whether it's MP or national government or leaders of the council still, but there's still cross-party work that's required. So yeah, that vision, I think it's to be across to citizens, but also through those who are in leadership positions across London.
You've talked there about the vision. Is there anything you feel like the Mayor could be doing to bring different groups together in order to deliver the actions for that vision, and what groups would you say were absolutely essential in terms of being part of that?
The Mayor is using his convening power, and he's been using it in the London Partnership Board, which I attended recently, and there are lots of dialogues going on around the proposed new London Growth Plan and the London Plan. I would like to see the Mayor doing more of that convening. We are going to need grand partnerships in London to deliver. Business, third sector, public sector, SMEs, the big corporates, community organisations. We are going to need some very, very deep engagement between sectors and collaboration. The Mayor may not have a lot of disposable money, but he has enormous convening power and authority. And I encourage the Mayor and all the deputy mayors to use that convening power. I encourage this committee to use its powers of persuasion with other committees, because we're talking about the just transition and the greatest challenge that human society faces in this committee, and the opportunities for this great industrial revolution. Are the other committees talking about it? Why is it located within the Environment Committee? Why are we always having this conversation within the environment sector? So let's convene, and convene much better.
Yeah, just absolutely echo that, especially the end of that. This should be a fundamental part of the Housing Committee, transport, everything. This should be almost to the point where almost the Environment Committee should just sit through and not necessarily be a separate thing within itself. So yeah, I agree with all of that, and really about small business as well, because I think particularly small business owners, when they compare themselves to the corporation, the multilaterals, feel they're always the ones who are having to pay the price. So I think that's really important. But just another addition is there's so much power being built right now across grassroots movements, grassroots groups, really politicised youth and younger people, marginalised communities and people of colour. So yeah, just really working with those groups and finding fora or forums in which we're moving to their communities. You can, whether it's a conference, whether it's anything else, it's always expecting people to come to you. So just finding ways and mechanisms to go to people and go to affected communities rather than expecting them to come to you and then give you their opinion.
If I may just add, I know it's got to be quick. We haven't talked a lot about adaptation. It was brought up with the Deputy Mayor earlier. I just think we also need to spend some time at some point, and the Mayor needs to lead on this, and I know he wants to and is doing so. There are a lot of Londoners who are on the front line of the climate emergency and who will die. They're through extreme heat especially. And I think it's going to be incredibly important for the Mayor to lead the process of understanding where the most vulnerable are and putting in place the protections that the most vulnerable need, because this is a matter of life and death.
So I think, just on that, obviously the report talked about deeper engagement, and you've talked about a lot of who we should be engaging with and the importance, particularly around the adaptations and the impact of people if we don't engage around that. So what else would you see particularly, Ashok, perhaps in terms of engagement that we haven't done so far?
So I think we need to find a better way of engaging. It's easy to say, but to give an example, the single most important requirement that people had or expressed that they had in the consultations that we ran as part of the Just Transition work was for trust to be created. People need to trust in, when somebody comes to your door and knocks on it. This is an example I often use and says, hey, we'd love to retrofit your council flat. And you say, that's great, but I've been asking for 5 years for somebody to come in and deal with the damp and the noise, and my kids haven't got anywhere to study. You've not helped me there, but now you're going to come and knock a hole in my wall and create dust and ask me to go maybe stay somewhere else. So for a while, we have to build trust, and we need forms of engagement that build trust. The problem is, we've got some fantastic forms of engagement that build trust. We heard about them in our investigation that councils and the GLA are doing. But they are so intensive and micro level that we can't do that street by street, community by community in the time frame. So we need to find ways of engaging with Londoners. Maybe it's through digital, maybe it's through public communications, maybe it's working with the community organisations directly on the ground, much more expressly and intentionally, to fast track the engagement necessary.
So I'm going to pause you there for a second, Ashok, because I really want to just drill down on that particular one. So look, this is really about getting those grassroots organisations, the ones that have the trust, with communities across London, making sure that when those conversations are happening, it isn't politicians talking down to people about why they need to make these changes. How do we activate those grassroots organisations and make sure they are on board when they are also having to deal with the other challenges around poverty and everything else as well?
It's a really good question. And it's still requiring a little bit of thought, but I think even in the first part, it's an incredibly important question to consider and to try and unpack. And I think even as an assembly, or as assembly members, just the willingness to try and unpack that can go quite a long way. But I think identifying and just doing the outreach to groups, and also understand that it's not going to happen overnight, and I think we're in obviously quite an urgency of the situation, and we know we need to get to these goals by 2030, as it were. But because of this, we can have a tendency often to try and rush these things because there's sort of like no time to wait. So I think similarly now, if there's a direction in that, as a political group or force wanting to engage with more grassroots groups, it's just understanding that time that it takes and the softer approach, and identifying those trusted messengers that can work between the two, and understanding while there be initial apprehension potentially and a little bit of mistrust, but just building slowly, essentially, obviously not over decades and decades, but building slowly, building that trust, finding ways to start that communication Like, it's not straight away like, oh, we've just decided we're going to do this project, tell us all your biggest things right now. Actually, a bit of relationship building first, being in the communities, and then you work towards that part, you know. And I think, yeah, that's it, is that you're building trust and relationships within communities, and then we'll be able to get that insight from them. But getting straight to insight, when they've never met you before, there's no like trust there, it's not going to happen.
Thank you, Tyrone. And I think that's really important in terms of going back to my first question about some of that negative leadership around the climate crisis, but also about disinformation, which can be a significant challenge in this area as well. So my last question, perhaps Ashok, you could say, look, in terms of how the London Sustainable Development Commission, following up its report on the just transition, how is that going to happen, and what do you think? Where do you think the most progress has been made so far?
So the most, it's difficult to say. In some ways, the most progress has been made on transport through active travel expansion and the investment in expansion of public transport and the move towards electric buses and so on. In terms of what we're going to do in the future, we haven't actually had our terms of office reconfirmed yet, so we don't even know if we're going to exist after November. But in the hope and happy expectation that we are reconfirmed as commissioners, I think we're going to return to finance, because there's no transition, just or otherwise, unless we can mobilise the resources to do it. I think we'll probably look at capability again, the points we were making about, notwithstanding that there's a dialogue needed between councils and the government directly, what nonetheless can we do to improve capability? Returning to the engagement point, this is so critical. The salience, the social license, what more can we do to boost that social license across London? And then there's heat, which I mentioned earlier. We really genuinely need very seriously a heat strategy to protect vulnerable Londoners from dying.
Yes, Assemblymember Cooper.
Just on the point about the renewal of the London Sustainable Development Commission, which, as Dr. Sinha mentioned at the beginning of his remarks, Nicky Gavron sat on for a very long time, and I'm now representing the Assembly. It might be something that the Environment Committee might wish to write to the Deputy Mayor and the Mayor about, and perhaps encourage them to make the decision to continue with the body. The expertise that is gathered around the table when I attend the meetings is quite extraordinary, and I think it would be a great shame to see the LSDC bite the dust, and it would be great if the Deputy Mayor and the Mayor could get on with making a decision, because obviously it's been hanging around since May as to whether or not it's going to continue.
I'd be very happy to do that, but it sounds like a conversation we might have to have offline, so we've got full cross-party agreement, but absolutely happy to. Thank you very much for the speed. That was very impressive, and the urgency. Talking of convening power, bringing Ashton and Warren together was really, really powerful, so I'm really glad, and thank you for all your evidence. That was incredibly helpful.
Thank you so much, Chair. And as I said, we look forward very much to the outcomes and conclusions and recommendations from your investigation.
Thanks, Ashok, and thank you, Tyrone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We're going to adjourn for 5 minutes. Thank you. Welcome back to today's Environment Committee meeting and our discussion on building action on net zero. Joining us in the chamber for the second panel are Namira Hamid, who is Advocacy Manager at Climate Outreach, Stephanie Draper, who is Director of Innovation and Practice at Involve, Yogita Popat, Programme Director, Culture and Sustainability at Barnet Council, and Kathy Peach, Director of Centre for Collective Intelligence Design at Nesta. Welcome to you all. I'm just going to open with an opening question, which is for the whole panel. You'll have seen that we're running slightly behind time, so if I could encourage just some brief remarks to get us going. And my question is this, now I found it. The Climate Change Committee has identified that around 1/3 of all emissions reductions to achieve net zero will require households or individuals to do behaviour change or change their behaviours. What would you say are the most important principles for public bodies to consider when designing net zero policies to influence behaviour change? And Namira, I might begin with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us. It was a pleasure listening into the rest of the conversation while we were sitting up there. So really appreciate the work that you are all leading. At Climate Outreach, we talk to governments, politicians, and organizations about how to tell a brilliant climate story. And we know that these stories are about human beings and their lived experiences. So with 20 years of experience of talking to humans and sort of looking at ways of engaging people, we hope to share our interesting and unique insights into getting the climate story right for London. So the question about sort of influencing behavior, we think that it requires great storytelling. It really is about, at the heart of it, about talking like a human. We think that we don't need to use technical terms like emissions and net zero when we actually what we want is to connect to people. So if what we actually want is, talking to them about warmer homes or cleaner air or healthier food, like those are the words to be using and not sort of leaving the technical jargon for rooms like these and others. Some of the principles, and I'll be very quick about this, is taking a people-centered approach, normalizing talking about climate as embedded with everything else that we are doing, about the way that we live our life, about the way that we use transport, about the way that we raise our kids. So we know that 20 years ago, talking about climate would have been something like cool and edgy to do, but now it's actually a very normal conversation because it's about the air we're breathing and the way that we're traveling and the food that we're eating. So it's all about sort of normalizing this. I know also that it's about how people want to be connected and to their values. So I live in Barnet, which is in North London, and we have other Barnet representation here as well. Barnet is not known for its climate activism traditionally. But when I started talking to my neighbors, we found out that our neighborhood cares deeply about the flora and the fauna. My 1-year-old son's childminder cares so much about the local bee population. So it's really about finding those ways of connecting to people's values, because that's something that they're holding true to their identity. And that's what it's about, connecting with Londoners. And the second sort of thing is about adopting fair and inclusive processes. People are worried about sort of what this energy transition means for them. So it's about sort of connecting with their lived realities and embedding it within sort of, if you want warmer home, if you want cleaner air, it's embedded within sort of making it more affordable for them as well. And I'll pause here for now.
Thank you. Stephanie.
Hi, so I work for Involve, which is the public participation charity in the UK, and so we spend our time engaging the public in decisions about climate change and a whole load of other issues. So my starting point for this is Involve, don't tell. Start where people are, rather than going out with the intention to persuade people to change their behaviour. So we've run numerous climate assemblies, climate juries, and they are never about persuading people to change their behaviour. But what they do is, by involving people in decisions, giving them information that they can deliberate over, trusting them in a sort of very adult to adult, to be able to have really fruitful, intelligent conversations about recommendations for councils or whoever the commissioning body is, you get to sort of good decisions, but you also build agency. You build people's ability and capacity to be engaged and activated. So from the Climate Assembly UK that we ran a few years ago, that was commissioned by 6 House of Commons select committees, we had 108 people. They deliberated, they came up with numerous recommendations, but we also checked in with them 2 years later, and 91% of them said that they had made at least one change to their behaviour, that's still maintained 2 years later, and nearly 50% of them said that they'd made 10 more changes. We never asked them to change any of their behaviour. We just gave them agency, provided them with the power to be involved in decision making. So that self-efficacy or agency is really central. And people don't like to be told what to do. They like to be involved in the policy decisions that are going to affect them.
So interesting. Thank you. Yogita.
Hi, I'm Yogita from Barnet Council. So Barnet declared a climate emergency only in 2022. And at that point, we really thought about, we have almost 400,000 people that we need to change the hearts and minds of. You know, we're one of London's largest local authorities, not only in terms of population, but in size. And about 1/3 of our borough is green spaces. So that's quite a lot of change we need to make. And we very much put communities and the residents at the heart of our delivery. And we recognise that, you know, 2042 is only 17 years away, if we're talking about 5 years being 2030 as a borough. Councils have this really unique position where we're influencers, conveners and enablers of change. So what we did was we launched our Barnet Zero campaign, which was a campaign for the community, by the community. So they were very much part of it. We've talked today about, you know, local government or government itself not telling people what to do, but we actually had communities who worked with us to shape those messages, to show what they were already doing in their communities. And actually it was so powerful when we launched Barnet Zero in January 2023. We had 155,000 views of our website over a 5-week period. So that's 40% of our population had looked at our website. They'd engaged in our processes. We have definitely done that bit about going to the communities. We've learned about what's important. And since then, we have done a citizens' assembly. But whilst doing a citizens' assembly, we recognise that young people are so important to this journey. It's their future that we're sort of protecting right now. So actually, we had a young people's assembly at the same time who both answered the same question of how do we work together to make Barnet more sustainable. So actually working with our communities and residents to have a question that we were all working towards. And those recommendations came out in 3 ways. It was, how do I, as a resident, do something different? How do we as a community come together and do something different? And how do you as Barnet partners, not only the council, but how do Barnet partners enable us to do that? So we really put our communities and residents at the heart of everything we do. And thinking about, going back to Namira's point, about really thinking about those wider benefits and that systems approach to behaviour change. It's not just about protecting the planet, which is super important, but actually making it relevant to your day jobs and thinking about those who are disengaged for whatever reason. Some people can't do it, some people won't do it. So really putting that at the heart of what we're doing.
Thank you. And finally, Kathy.
So I think we need a complete pivot in how we approach behaviour change communication. For the last couple of decades, the dominant way that we've approached this is by assuming that we give information to people, we raise awareness about the behaviour change that's needed, and then that leads to change in their everyday behaviours. And what the evidence is now showing is that there have been incremental improvements in things like the way people choose to travel, increasing support for eating more vegetarian foods, but it's still very incremental and it's nowhere near getting us to the scale of changes that we need to make to actually hit net zero targets. And increasingly, all of the research and evidence is showing that information and awareness campaigns alone do not work without extra incentives and without the changes, the wider changes to society that make those low carbon behaviours much easier for people, much cheaper for people, and also more socially acceptable. And so I think what's really needed is to find new ways to bring communities into conversations about how we make those wider societal changes that make it much easier for people to adopt those low carbon behaviours at scale. And so at the Centre for Collective Intelligence Design at Nesta, the key thing that we do is use digital technologies to bring together people at much greater scale to have some of these conversations about the bold policy options, some of the difficult policy options that could help us to get there on that pathway to net zero. So we ran a project last year called the Strategy Room, which did exactly that. And what we found was that there's actually very high levels of support for those bolder policy actions right across all demographics. We really didn't see any significant difference by gender, age, or ethnicity. The public and political mandate is there, and I think there is a really important role to really build that political mandate and make it much more visible, giving Assembly members, councillors, all elected representatives the confidence that they can make those choices and bring the public with them.
Thank you all for those brilliant introductory remarks. It sounds like there's a theme of making big system change in order to drive that individual change, but starting with the system. Assemblymember Tyrrell did have some questions about climate skeptics, but has thankfully withdrawn those questions. But we might write to you, if that's okay, just for some written evidence, so we can have a bit more time to explore other issues now. So I'm going to hand over to Assemblymember McCartney on public engagement strategies.
Yes, and I want to really ask about who should be doing the engagement. You obviously have different levels of government. You have national government, the mayor, an assembly at regional government and local councils. And then you have a whole host of community groups and so forth. Who should actually be doing the messaging? And should they be doing different sorts of messaging depending on who they are? And can I ask you, I don't know if you can wrap it up again, how effective are they being done at the moment? I don't know who wants to start with that. Yeah, Cathy.
I think the short answer is everyone needs to be doing it. So I think one of the key things that is currently missing is that public engagement at scale. So I think what we've seen over the last few years is lots of great examples of much more innovative practice, things like citizens' assemblies, been really excited to see the increasing adoption of those. But I think, as Ashok mentioned earlier, while we're doing some of that engagement, it's still micro scale. We're not doing the engagement at massive scale that is really needed to bring all of the public along and to make the public feel engaged. We can't be satisfied that just saying we've run a citizens' assembly, we have 50 people from our borough of 150,000 people, 200, 400,000 people, and that's our public engagement done. And I think there is a vacuum at the moment that probably does need to be led by central government, but I think the mayor has a really important role to lead this across London, really scaling up that engagement and involving many more diverse communities than are perhaps currently being engaged in climate conversations.
Okay. Gita.
Absolutely agree with Cathy that we all need to be doing this. It's not one person's role. So at Barnet, we did do our Citizens' Assembly, but really recognised the importance of that continued legacy of it. So it wasn't just a one-off, you're done, here are your recommendations, go away, kind of deliver on them. So what we've done is since then, we launched an innovation challenge, which we opened up to anyone who works, works or studies in the borough, asking them to come up with innovative ideas. So it's things like doing things in primary schools or nurseries, but actually this is a collective responsibility of anyone who was a resident who just wanted to get involved. We launched that, which worked really well. We had over 100 ideas. Doesn't sound a lot, but that's quite a lot. And then opened it up to a public vote for the winners. And we had 7,500 people who voted. it's a lot because you don't normally expect that. So we were so excited about that. What we also did was we had action groups. So we had 5 themes coming out of the recommendations of our Citizens' Assembly, and we had action groups that were led by communities, co-facilitated by us as enablers to make things happen. And those action groups brought people together, and that's led to one of our first community energy groups being built from that, because they've kind of worked together. Moving on from that, we recognise the importance of faith leaders, of schools, of community groups. So we're now introducing carbon literacy training for all of those different groups and letting them become the messengers for their communities and their residents, and actually people who trust. I think it was talked about in the first panel, second panel, about how people trust people around them. So looking at Namira's example earlier about how we get our neighbours to trust, but we need to equip them with the information as well. So we're beginning to do that in Barnet, sort of really beginning that massive scale change of getting all of these different groups trained and understanding and being on this journey with us, because for us it's like joining us on our journey.
Yeah, I think if we're thinking about involving people in everyday decision making, then that happens at lots of different levels. So we were running a climate jury in Hackney on extreme heat and coming up with recommendations for the council. And then at times, some of those recommendations actually turns out they're for the local hospital or they're for the mayor's office. So it's kind of it's how do you encourage people to feed into decisions? And if it's real engagement, then it is happening at every level. And because different institutions are making decisions at different levels. So that's kind of the fit that we want. And then the other thing to note is it's not a one-off. So we ran a climate assembly in Camden, but there's now a climate panel that is ongoing, that's tracking progress, that's holding the council to account. There'll be a kind of revisiting of the targets with sort of a fresh group of citizens. So it's kind of how do you make that an ongoing part of governance? And that's the sort of really exciting area where again, you're really empowering people and giving people agency to make decisions, and at the same time shifting power and involving community groups and enabling grassroots organisations to come up with their own suggestions too, and having a conduit for them to be able to feed into decisions too.
Completely agreed with everything that's said. And just to add a little bit more, a lot of the work that we do is about how to gain trust and influence with people. So we know from our studies and studies across the UK that David Attenborough has the highest sort of trust that he gets, but there aren't enough David Attenboroughs around. And so who do you go to next? For some, it is the Mayor of London from our research. But for others, they have completely lost trust in anything to do with government. So, for example, one of the segments that we look at from our Britain Talks climate research is the Loyal National segment. And it's a very interesting segment. They care deeply about sort of cleaner air for the next generation, but they don't feel the need to be in climate protests, or they don't see any value in that. So, you know, how do we work with that segment of population? Because they have comparatively lower trust in institutions, there's a lot of work that needs to be done to build trust. But while that work is being done, we know that Loyal Nationals care a lot about what their friends and family are doing. So one of the work that Nesta actually did, and I think Kathy can speak more about it, is about heat pumps. And we see that for the most part, the number one reason people want to do something is not if someone is telling them to do, as Stephanie said, but if one of their friends or family have installed a heat pump or something at home, that becomes, oh, okay, that's something that I can do as well. So it's really about finding exactly for which segment of people, which trusted messenger works best. And it's a lot of this work, like all of us are very super prepared to guide the London Assembly on, because that's what we work on.
Okay, that's really helpful. I think that question of trust was a question I was going to ask, but I think at least two of you answered that very well. I noticed that in Scotland and Wales, they do publish public engagement strategies, but we don't seem to have one for England. Do we need one, and do we need one for London? And if so, who should be the one for, holding the London plan? Should that be the Mayor or somebody else for the London engagement strategy? I don't know who wants to. Yeah,
I can start. So the public participation framework in Scotland, I think, has been incredibly successful in terms of setting out an expectation that there will be involvement of the public in decisions, but also building capacity and providing tools and resources for people to be able to do that, and enabling kind of building up towards understanding the impact of these processes. So I do think that the Mayor's Office has a role to play in terms of actually setting out what should good public engagement look like, because there is good and there is not so good. If you set out to engage people and ask them lots of questions about how they want to live and how they want to heat their homes and all of those things, and then you do nothing with what they've suggested, that is not productive engagement. That will set us back in terms of trust. And so actually also having standards that involve working with a whole lot of other people working in this field has identified a set of standards that make citizens' assemblies and other things successful and effective. That is also part of that strategy. So I think there is, we would hope that many institutions have these sorts of engagement frameworks and that they work at different levels. I also think there's a role in terms of the London office helping to catalyse action at council level and supporting the boroughs to do this work and have resources to support that work as well. And one thing I just thought of as I was coming here was, is there a way that actually there could be a sort of repository for recommendations, all of the recommendations that are coming out of these many processes, so that there can be sort of shared learning of, oh, Haringey, you've got a similar recommendation on extreme heat to Hounslow. How are we going to do that? And it become a real generative change in the system.
Okay, so some sort of learning network might be helpful. Or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think there already are learning networks. So there's the Sustainable Action Network where we share, and there's knowledge exchange. So there's lots of learning networks out there already. But I think there is something about having those toolkits. So one of the things we did at Barnet was, while we were doing our Citizens' Assembly, we wrote a toolkit for delivering a Citizens' Assembly. So there's some great advice on this is what a Citizens' Assembly is, but just those basic things you need to know to keep those people who are giving up their time and giving you their thoughts engaged and feeling valued is really, really important. And that was really hard to sort of know until we did it. But for me, I think it's more about having consistent messaging that can be used and understood across London. And it's thinking about that impact of what one message might have on another bit. So we've talked about, warm homes, we've talked about fuel poverty. So how do we have one messaging that everyone is behind? And although there will never be another Barnet Zero, but do we need a Barnet Zero for London so that it doesn't matter who you are or what industry you are behind, you are all using the same branding and the same, because at the moment, in different parts of London, we're giving not different messages, but different messages at different times. And actually, if we were all giving the same message across London at exactly the same time, that's really powerful, and it's subliminal as well. It doesn't matter where you go, because people don't have boundaries. We go across our boroughs and we go across our borders. I need to know what's happening in Enfield or in Harrow or in Haringey, but let's all be saying the same thing and have that consistent messaging coming out from across London.
I think at the moment, the picture, if you look at public engagement that's happening across London, it's quite piecemeal, it's quite patchwork, it's often driven by specific projects. Barnet is, I think, unusual in having that much bigger picture in terms of the ongoing engagement. I think there is a real need for the Mayor to own and lead a public engagement strategy that really sets the ambition and the vision much higher. and also uses that as a tool to kind of lever in extra resources to support boroughs to do more public engagement, more quality engagement, more sustained engagement, because councils are struggling. They don't have the financial resources, they don't have the teams often to actually be out there in the community doing some of the engagement. And I think there's a third thing that we haven't talked about yet, which is about the variety of methods that we use for engaging the public. There is a lot that London can learn from other cities who are really very much at the cutting edge when it comes to engaging their residents through digital tools. So I can give you some examples. Lisbon has a participatory budgeting programme where they allocate around 30 million euros every year for residents to decide how to allocate towards sustainability initiatives. Paris has a participatory budgeting programme where, again, residents can decide how 75 million euros of public funds are spent. That's really putting decision-making power into the public's hands. And we know from the polling that we've done of residents across the UK that participatory budgeting is the way of engaging that majority of them are most keen on. So there's, I think, a massive opportunity there. A second opportunity is to learn from Barcelona. So Barcelona has set up an Office of Citizen Science to bring together academics and community organisations with community members, particularly disadvantaged communities, to generate new data and insights on lots of different environmental indicators that actually really help with developing much more robust plans and strategies. There's a huge opportunity in London as well. We have some of the world-leading experts in citizen science here in the capital. We also have a real culture of participating in citizen science initiatives in this country. So lots of people will take part in things like RSPB Birdwatch. We've got really, really solid foundations that I think we could be building on to kind of put community-generated data and monitoring at the heart of our kind of net zero and environmental kind of action targets.
Thank you. That's really interesting, and I'm sure we'll be taking some of that forward. Can I ask my final question? I think, Igita, you talked about having consistent messaging, but if we're looking at net zero and we're looking at the differing issues, for example, energy, transport, housing, would the mechanisms of engagement be different with regard to them, or is the method of engagement similar no matter what comes into that? And I can see Namira wants to come in as well.
Yeah. So for me, I don't think we can't have one message for everything. That doesn't work. You know, climate outreach has got their personas, and we need to talk to different people in different ways.
I'm talking about the methods of engaging rather than necessarily the messaging.
So I think there are different methods of engagement that we need to be quite... we need to be innovative in the way that we do engage with our residents and different things. So transport will need a different engagement strategy to energy, to waste or food, and we need to just think about what are the right engagement tools. So actually, when we did our Citizens' Assembly, we were really keen to be a little bit innovative when we did it. So that's why we had a Young People's Assembly. But we also used the strategy room that Nesta and UCL worked on, and when we talked about digital tools. And it was so interesting because we did the transport and the energy tool that we use. And the way people sort of reacted to those was really, really interesting, and that's where you could see the power, how someone who might be renting, how they feel about energy uses versus the landlord, and I think we just need to take a step back. Historically, we've all done engagement in the same way. Let's get everyone in a workshop and we'll facilitate and we'll ask them around a table. That doesn't work anymore, and we need to be thinking about that, and that's why we're quite keen at Barnet to look at all of these really different engagement strategies and really hear what people are telling us. This is their lives we are trying to protect, so let's listen to what they're saying, but take those methods to them and listen to see how they want to talk to us.
We could probably learn a lot about that as well.
And just to add more about the importance of language in how we engage as well. So we know from our research that, especially because you use the term net zero, so we know that specifically on net zero, we find that the idea of net zero isn't the problem in London and across UK as well. We tested 3 terms to see which people prefer. So the first one was Britain ends its contribution to climate change. The second was Britain balances the amount of carbon dioxide we release with the amount we remove from it. And the third was Britain reaches net zero. We found that the most popular amongst these options was the balancing option. People understood the term and the word balance. So the idea of restoring balance to emissions in the planet is appealing to people across all segments of our research, in particularly those more right-wing segments. So what we find is that whenever we can eliminate using words like net zero if what we mean is warmer home, cleaner air, and all of that. The other thing specific to London that we think that might be useful in engagement is, for example, if you're talking about clean air, we don't necessarily need to be using the word emissions if what we actually mean is pollution. So from our research, we find out that pollution and cleaner air for the children or for themselves is something that does resonate with their values instead of technical terms like emissions. So just sort of to reiterate the importance of language in engagement as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I've got indications in a moment from Assemblymember Roberts and Assemblymember Mahfouz. I just want to pick up on the last thing that was said, though. So sometimes I worry about balance, particularly in climate politics. It's a bit like having a Big Mac and having a salad next to it and hoping you're going to lose weight. How do we, and food actually, incidentally, is I think one of the areas that is most complicated in terms of meat reduction. How do we have these complicated conversations with people while still having to appeal to people who aren't necessarily engaging with the conversation?
I'll just quickly add something small and then give it to the... Too often, I think this is a lot of related to what we do. Too often people are scared to tell their climate story for fear of criticism that they aren't doing enough. So even the little bit that they would be doing, they would be criticized for using a plastic water bottle, or they would be criticized for actually sort of using a car instead of taking public transport. So a lot of the messaging needs to be about just focusing on the positives and not guilting people into making any decisions. So we need to show that progress is already being made as well, make people feel positive and hopeful that whatever they're doing is part of the journey that they are on with the collective of the rest of the city and the rest of the country. So just sort of leaving on the importance of positive messaging.
Thank you. Stephanie?
Yeah, so food is really... So we have just run a deliberation on food in Manchester with the University of Lancaster, and it's part of a project where we're essentially looking at different sorts of actions and how much emissions reduction that leads to. And so what we did was we gave the 40 or so participants a whole load of information they heard from different speakers about sort of different impacts of food. They then worked together to come up with, here are the sort of, here's our level of ambition in terms of the level of change we'd like to see, and here are the sorts of actions that we think would be acceptable. So not moving to a completely vegan diet, but sort of flexitarian. And then we fed that into a model that then reflected back to them, your recommendations will give us this much in terms of, and then they were able to then deliberate again and say, do we think that's enough? Does that work? So it's kind of, it's that sort of engagement in conversation and giving that information, but time for people to work together, share their lived experience, assess what they think is going to be acceptable, talk about the sort of wider system conditions that they need to support them. And then you get to some really robust recommendations, but you also have created that agency that I talked about at the beginning.
Thank you. Kathy, I think you also indicated.
Yeah, I think it comes back to the point I made at the start, which is what levers do you have to change the environment that makes it easier for people to make those choices or to have those options available to them? So in the strategy room project, which we've mentioned, one of the most popular policies, I think it was probably either number 1 or number 2, was sustainably sourced, healthy food in the public sector. So in hospitals, schools, prisons, etc. People really, really liked that idea. Partly that's a question of framing. You know, you're framing it in terms of kind of health, sustainability, something that's kind of good for you and your family. People really, really like that idea. I think it indicates that there's a mandate there for people right across government who have the levers of power to pull to effect some of those changes. And it's much easier then for people to make some of those choices, rather than just expecting people to make those changes that might be hard or expensive or difficult themselves.
Really well articulated. Thank you. Assemblymember Roberts, thanks for your patience.
Thank you. Earlier today, Assemblymember Mahfouz was wanting me to blow Richmond's trumpet about our achievements in this field, and you mentioned David Attenborough being the trusted voice of this particular area. When we had our Children's Assembly to deal with this, we had David Attenborough as our guest speaker in person. So there you are. That's a number 1. Anyway, the question I have is, given the divided nature of London politics, given the patchwork quilt that we have of 32 boroughs plus the city, given the fact that there is often a very adversarial nature to these things, whether, you know, the war on motorists is the phrase that we hear all the time, is it possible, do you think, for individual boroughs to facilitate real change on their own? Or do you think this is something which is best handled at London-wide level through the Mayor and through the Assembly?
In short, if I had to say, I think both. We need London-level leadership. Our research shows that people are looking for leadership because they think this is an important issue, but they want the government to lead it because people don't want to be left alone to deal with this by themselves. They feel more fear if they think they're the only ones dealing with this. So once the government shows leadership through a strategy, a public engagement strategy, I think that reassures people. And then a lot of the local engagement needs to be done at a local level. That cannot be done at a higher level. So the Mayor of London, wherever he can convene, he does that. And then the rest, he sort of gives the power of engagement to local areas.
And I think it depends what question you're asking. So when we were working in Southampton on an assembly feeding into their transport strategy, that was kind of Southampton-wide. And what they took from that was the sort of engagement techniques that we use that they are now applying at a super local level for local, you know, for local transport plans and for any schemes in sort of low traffic neighbourhoods, and all of those things needs to happen really, really locally, because you need to be able to respond to what people are saying. If they're actually saying, what we value about this place is, and how we want you to roll out a district heat network or whatever else it is this way, you need to be able to respond to that. But as Namira says, then you need that kind of strategic guidance at London and at central government level.
So boroughs know their residents best. So we need to work with our residents and our communities and sort of support them. You know, I go back to my favourite phrase of enablers, convenience and influencers of place. So I think boroughs need to be able to do that. We need to do that well, and, you know, we need to bring our residents and communities on our journey with us. In Barnet, we have a vision to be one of London's most sustainable boroughs, and we had quite a big debate on whether we should be the most sustainable, but actually when we reflected on it, if we were the most, it meant no one else was. So actually we need to be one of and have all of our London boroughs being one of London's most sustainable boroughs, so that we all are together. So I think, you know, I work very closely with my colleagues across London who are working in the environment and climate change areas, and we talk to each other and we work together and we collaborate. So there are opportunities for collaboration, there are opportunities for working at a borough level, and there are opportunities for working at a London level. So I think, as Namira and Stephanie have just said, we need to do all of the above because we all need to be on this journey together.
I think one of the major opportunities for collaboration between boroughs is on creating the infrastructure for better, larger, more innovative participation. There are obviously upfront costs to things like using technology or developing technology tools for some of that wider scale engagement. There is an opportunity, I think, for London boroughs and for the GLA to be really investing in some of those approaches that then can be used by lots of different councils. And I think there are already initiatives, things like LOTI, the London Office for Technology and Innovation, that are making steps in that direction. But I would say that's one key area where I think there could be a lot more coordination, a lot more shared investment. And I think, secondly, there is an opportunity for boroughs to run similar exercises across, obviously, their very different kind of makeups and residents, but to then understand where are their similarities, where are their differences, and I think that will provide new insights where there might be opportunities for collaboration between boroughs that perhaps haven't been spotted or understood before.
Thank you. Assemblyman Mahfouz.
Thanks. I think on that particular point, Cathy actually, the Re-London or Elwarb as it was before, did do quite a bit of work around behaviour change, particularly around recycling, and those sort of micro-level learnings of implementing on a small-scale level, where that can then be replicated across different types of estates or different types of tenure across London. The challenge then, of course, becomes about the funding for those sorts of programmes and replicating it. And I think one of the challenges we've talked about is about the communication, clearly about being on the ground level. One of the things I wanted to go back to, Cathy, was just around the participatory budgeting. So you used that example. When I was lead for finance at Ealing, one of the things I looked at in terms of significant cuts to local authorities, wanted to make sure that more participatory involvement going forward, but there actually weren't very many, if any, really good examples domestically to replicate. So what would, you've talked about it and you feel that's a particular lever that we could be using, but actually if we haven't got good domestic examples of that, where's the best place to start and take that forward?
I think we'd be happy to help facilitate some introductions to some of the cities around the world that are already using participatory budgeting approaches. We've worked with cities in the Nordic regions who are using participatory budgeting. We also have contacts with others. We're happy to help the Assembly to make some of those connections. I don't know much detail about it. I know Newham have started a participatory budgeting programme recently. I think it's about £250,000. I don't really know any more details. It feels like a massive missed opportunity. It's actually quite a mature method now, at least in other places around the world. So while we might not have a huge body of evidence and practice here in the UK, I think there's plenty for us to learn from.
Melbourne is another really good example, but I'm noting that the Green Roots Fund is going to be co-designed, so maybe that could be a really good way of modelling or experimenting with that approach.
Sorry, I was taking notes. I really want to talk about art and drama, but I'm aware that we're running out of time, so I'm going to resist. But I just, Assemblymember Cooper for our final section.
Well, not just me. I think there might be some others as well. I think there's a big issue actually about the language we use all the time as well, which I find, very mysterious. Net zero, just transition. These are all phrases that a lot of people wouldn't ever dream of using in their ordinary speech. So I still think we need to address that, but that's not what I'm going to ask you about. I want to ask you about how important it is to have alignment in messaging between different levels of government, hopefully using language that people can understand. And I'll start with Cathy and then work down to see who else wants to come in.
I think it helps in some ways to have alignment. It depends very much on the specifics. I think there are also examples where it can be really useful to maybe have more ambitious messaging or more ambitious targets. And I think a really good example of this is Wales, where Wales has the second highest levels of recycling of any country in the world. And they actively use that to kind of really build that sense of collective identity and collective pride around, you know, that position. And they use that to reinforce that behaviour amongst their residents. So I think there are cases where actually maybe having that sense of we're going further, we're going faster, can actually really help galvanise that sense of momentum and the sense of community behind it.
That's really interesting, and I'll let Hugh Aranka-Davies, who is the lead on climate and is now also the Deputy First Minister, know that you said that. He's someone I know very well. Yogita.
Yeah, thanks. So for us, that's that collective messaging coming out, so that we're all behind it, but also thinking about having that consistent guidance on reporting as well, because at the moment we're all reporting slightly differently. So that would be really useful, but also thinking about the dependencies of decision making across different policies. So earlier on, you asked the Deputy Mayor how he was going to sort of work with other Deputy Mayors across London. So actually we've got to think about, so at Barnet, one of the things that we've been looking at is those interdependencies. So if you are going to build loads of new homes in your borough, which is great, are we making sure that they are fit for the future, or are we building homes that are affordable? Or if we're about to bring in a new road network because we need it, are we thinking about the impact of other policies? So it's really thinking about the dependencies of our decision making across different policies, and then also thinking about targets and initiatives that might be perverse against each other. So asking one to do one thing, what is the impact over there? So it's that consistency, and that's why you do need alignment and conversations across different departments across London.
Yes, in fact, I was going to ask about targets as well as messaging, because obviously we've got different targets for national government, for the boroughs, City Hall, you know, all over the place, really. So bringing those together, you think would be helpful, as well as, you know, the issues around messaging.
Yeah, so what we've done at Barnet is we've just done a piece of work mapping our partners' targets, because we have a borough target of 2042. So if our partners have different targets and they're at 2050 or 2046, that means the borough won't get there. So we've started mapping that, because we need everyone to be on the same trajectory as us. And if they're not, we need to be having those conversations to understand how we might be able to support them or not, you know.
And how did you choose 2042, by the way?
It was in our manifesto commitments of our administration.
Okay, and do you know how that was selected for the commitment in the manifesto?
I don't, but I could get that for you.
I think we'd be interested to know why 2042. That would be interesting. Stephanie, I don't know whether you want to come in on, you know, all this stuff about consistent messaging, consistent targets at all the different layers of government. You know, do you think there needs to be more done here to bring the messaging and the targets into line with each other?
So I'm conflicted on this, in that my sort of strategic brain says, yes, we need that consistency. It would be good to be joined up. And we know that consistent messaging works in terms of the kind of wider media and that side of things. But at the same time, we've been doing some work in 25 local authorities across the UK, talking about net zero strategies, but not talking about net zero. So starting where people are, asking them, what do they value about their place? What do they want to change about their place? How does then action on climate change, action on nature, net zero fit into that? And then you're talking a much more sort of local language, and you're starting where people are. So I think there's a real sort of balance, and maybe the thing is to have your ambitious goals be consistent, but be very responsive to local language and local needs when you're talking about implementation and how things are rolled out and what actually happens.
That's interesting. I mean, I just, in a previous life, did some stuff around behaviour change, so I have very strong views about this, including around people's approach to using water. And we changed the way that we did the messaging quite substantially, depending on which community we were working with, because the messaging that London is as dry as Dubai clearly has still not got through to people. Lots of people are very wasteful about water, but how people use water is very different according to what community you might be talking to. So asking some people not to have baths, they probably won't be having baths very much anyway, so that's a bit of a redundant. So, Namira, I wonder if you would like to come in on this about the sort of consistency of messaging, making sure it hits the right group of people that you're working with. Do we need to get those targets consistently? Does it matter if the London target is 2030 and Barnet is 2042?
I think I'm of the opinion and completely agree with everything that has been said, but that different messaging for different segments of people, because that's what our research shows. Something interesting about London, that when we really drill down into London research, it showed that London is different from other cities in so many ways, and one of them is that 2/3 of London babies are born to parents from outside of the UK, and that gives us a massive opportunity, a very rich opportunity to connect climate to not just what's happening in a very sort of London or UK context, but sort of climate disasters across the world. And London is especially, for them, it would resonate a lot, seeing way more drastic impacts of climate around the world, because their families are from a lot of those regions as well. So my family is from South Asia, and for us, that sort of, I think in London, we're in a much better environment, but for me, the sort of context of climate change is always much more drastic than when I think about London. So we feel at Climate Outreach that these sort of backgrounds that Londoners are from provides a rich opportunity. And also about consistency, just to add a small point, is that evidence suggests that leaders who lead by example enjoy much greater approval and are considered more credible leaders. And of course, all of us know this, but this goes to climate change leadership as well. So local leadership, or at a mayor level or at a government level, whatever it is, it just needs to show that our leaders are also consistently following behaviors that are more in tune with what they're preaching, and that goes across all levels.
I think it goes across all areas of government, actually, that if people are asking other people to do something and then they're failing to do it themselves, then it doesn't ever land well with anybody, including political opponents, obviously, but, just with ordinary people who are not involved in politics. If you say everyone should get out of their cars and then you're endlessly seen in a car or travelling by plane, then that's not really very convincing of the need for to address climate issues, let alone have an urgent approach to climate issues. I can see that Cathy wants to come back in on some of these other areas, because I'd only asked you the question about consistent messaging, I think, when you answered.
So I just wanted to caution that I think it's really important we don't equate public engagement and participation with just a top-down broadcast of messaging, whether those messages are consistent or not, and that actually we think about it as opportunities for people to participate in decision-making, often much earlier in the policy-making process. And what we know from the research that we've done and the polling we've done so far is this is nationally, 72% of people think it's really important that they have a say in how we transition to net zero, but only 12% of people think the government is currently doing a good job of that. And again, other polling that we've done really shows that people want to participate. There is enthusiasm there, and interestingly, there is more enthusiasm in London than anywhere else in the country. But there just aren't the range of opportunities. There is not enough opportunity, not enough different types of ways for people to engage at the moment. So I would say that's a really critical thing that we urgently need to address.
So one of the things I got involved in when I was doing behaviour change work was the concept of peers working with their neighbours. My background's working in social housing, and it was not just that people took the message more successfully if their neighbour said, why don't you do this, because I found it very helpful for reducing my energy bills, or my food tastes better because I grew some of it, or whatever it was. But it also then stopped being an engagement and started being an involvement, because two neighbours were having a conversation and both then became involved. Is that part of what we need to be doing more successfully?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. I'm going to pass back to the chair because otherwise I think he might kill me for overrunning.
Not at all.
And putting in an additional question there. But thank you very much. You've all been very helpful.
Kathy, you've prompted my next question, actually, which is about citizens' assemblies. Now, when I was first elected for London Assembly, and I'm genuinely not telling this story to have a go at the mayor, I'll do that other times, but not today. The first question I ever asked was about citizens' assemblies, and his response to me was that I had to watch out I wasn't in danger of making myself redundant. Now, the reason why I say I'm not having a go at the mayor is I think that's very indicative of a kind of top-down politics that we see throughout the political system, of if we give people too much power or say, then they might disrupt things. And that kind of objection I've heard from a mayor of one of our boroughs as well when I brought this story up. And she said to me that she'd be really offended if a mayor started to meddle in boroughs by having their own citizens' assemblies when boroughs are doing their own citizens' assemblies. Anyway, it strikes me all as very parochial and territorial, as opposed to the conversation we're having today, which is, yes, we need to have these things going on in boroughs, but there are London-wide strategies that need to happen. So my question is, how do we sell this to those people in power? What are the benefits of citizens' assemblies that can actually help those people who are in power? Yogita.
So what we did when we did our Citizens' Assembly was we had an independent analysis of it done to sort of say, because you will get that, we've spent a lot of money on a Citizens' Assembly. Is it worthwhile? What are the outcomes? So we actually had some independent observations done through Middlesex University, through their academics, and they've got a report which I'm happy to share with you. It's on our website. But what it really did allow us to do was bring parts of the communities into the process that wouldn't normally have been there. And it made it very, very real to everybody in that room. And having done a Citizens' Assembly, having never heard of it before that, having done a Citizens' Assembly, it was just so powerful to sit in the room of having 40 people on day one, of which some of them just didn't know anything about climate change, didn't care about climate change, didn't think it was their problem, and then others being really, really engaged and really thinking it was important for them, to, on the last day, having built some real relationships, but actually everyone agreeing to those recommendations that we made and getting behind it. And it is really powerful. 18 months after our Citizens' Assembly has finished, I would say probably about 25% of those people that were on the panel, or the participants, are still engaging with us, and they are still working with us. So it was so powerful. And even the young people, we've still got a handful of those young people who still want to be engaged with us and work with us on helping develop strategies, a bit like what Camden have done. You've got that ongoing engagement. So I think for us it was having a recommendation that could be owned and delivered by everyone. So for me, that was my argument for it.
Thank you. Stephanie, I think you're next.
Yeah, so obviously this is something that we are talking about all the time, and we think that these sorts of processes, citizens' assemblies, juries, are to complement the system. So there are multiple decisions and strategies that have to be made in between election periods, and this gives an opportunity to be able to test out different ideas. Quite often we find it, so in the Citizens' Assembly UK, 80% of participants said, actually, we think that if you're flying often, then there should be a higher tax. So there are things that are surprising that emerge from this that can give you support for more radical political ideas. We've talked a lot about trust from the Westminster Citizens' Assembly. Afterwards, there were 27% of people beforehand felt listened to by Westminster. At the end, it was 63%, and there was a 20% increase in them trusting Westminster to do something different. I read a brilliant statistic that 84% of people in the UK trust their neighbours, and that we know all of the stats relating to how much they trust politicians. So that's a helpful piece, but I think it's about better policy making. It's about helping with those stuck problems and giving legitimacy for solutions because they're generated by people who are trusted.
Thank you. I want to ask my neighbours now if they trust me. Kathy.
I think similarly to what Steph said, involving people in shaping policy will help you end up with better, fairer policies. Politically, you'll probably end up doing fewer U-turns. You will have greater success when those policies get implemented. You will have greater adoption or compliance with those policies by the public. So there's, I think, an increasingly strong political case for involving people as part of the process, and trust. So the perceived fairness of the process and the trust in the institution is also really critical. I think the thing I would say is we're getting pretty good in this country actually at doing those citizens' assemblies and hitting those things. Where we're less good is really then pairing that relatively small-scale engagement with the large-scale engagement that really will ensure there is much broader public buy-in and support for those policies. Again, there are initiatives happening in places like Taiwan where they are crowdsourcing, using a digital tool called Polis, ideas for how to tackle complex legislative challenges like how to regulate Uber, for example. So there are, again, examples of around the world of how you can really pair some of the in-person, small group, deliberative, in-depth processes with a kind of much larger scale engagement that brings even more people into those processes.
Can I ask briefly if you know why that is, or why you think that is, why we're good at the small but not the big? Is it a resourcing issue?
I think it is a bit of a resourcing issue. I don't know, maybe Yogita, you can talk to that. I think resourcing is definitely a key part. I don't think it's about adoption of digital technologies. Actually, as a society, you know, we have great adoption of digital technologies. We've got some of the leading tech companies, SMEs, civic tech, GovTech kind of startups in this country. Again, I think there's much more opportunity for us.
Thank you. Stephanie, was that you indicating? Yes.
I think we also are really good at these kind of social technologies. So Involve's been around for 20 years. We've been developing these approaches. And I think Kathy's point is well made. So, you know, now if we are running a citizens process, like a jury, we would try and go wide first so that you ask the question of a much wider population using, you know, polling or door knocking or community conversations, encouraging people to go and ask their neighbours what they think before you go into the more in-depth deliberative processes. So you get that breadth within the process. But we do need to be reaching many more people.
It's really helpful, thank you. Excellent. And then for our final question, I'm going to Assemblymember Tyrrell.
Thank you, Chair. What have you learned, I suppose this is to Barnet first, what have you learned about the benefits of engaging with smaller numbers of people through things like climate assemblies?
We've learned that everyone cares, and it's really important to hear them. And we've learned to give our communities and residents a voice. If you give them the opportunity, they will come on that journey with you, they will get engaged with you. So that's been really powerful. And from our Citizens Assembly and the community action groups we had, that led to our faith charter that we're beginning to work on. It led to our schools charter that we're beginning to work on. So actually it was just giving the time and the energy to this process has been so powerful, and we've talked about it today, that one person has this ripple effect. So actually a council can't do it all, partners can't do it all, the 20 people in this room can't do it all, but actually if we enable 40 people to be on that journey with us, they'll talk to another 40 and then they'll talk to another 40, you know, and we'll all be sort of, it has that ripple effect. So that's been so powerful to see. And when we launched Barnet Zero, and I keep calling it a campaign for the community, by the community. When we launched it, what was really powerful, you're always going to have those people who have negative comments about anything we do, but having that community come back and say, well, actually, no, what about this and what about that? It then became all of them talking to each other. So we didn't have to sort of go back on those negative comments. It was actually the communities and the residents that were talking to each other.
Thank you for that. I think that also did So I was going to say thank you for that. Yeah, I appreciate what you say about the negative comments from the community ambassador in Bromley at the moment. We're trialling sustainable verges on certain areas, and it's quite interesting because I get just as many emails from people saying cut the grass as many people saying don't cut the grass, and yeah, that's fun. So, but on that, can I just ask about what you have found the turnout at these assemblies have been kind of compared to the people who have been invited today?
Yeah, so when we did our Citizens' Assembly, we coupled it as a call to action. So we launched our Bar Net Zero campaign. Our leader had done his New Year's message at the same time. So we actually did all of these things and made it a thing you wanted to be involved in. So have you got your letter? So we took photos of the letters going into the post boxes and made it a thing. So actually what we've done throughout all of our campaigns is have call to actions, and without using the word gamify, you almost make it that, oh, I want to be involved in that. Why haven't I got a letter? And actually we used a company called Sortition Foundation to help us sort of get the residents. And what they said was for a face-to-face assembly, they would normally expect about 2 or 3% return rate. But because of the way we had done it in Barnet, we had a 4-point-something return rate, and they'd only ever had that level of engagement when it was online during COVID. So the fact that we had people who were really, really enthused and were coming along the journey with us was great. So yeah, they were really impressed with the numbers we had. But we, everything we have done, we have campaigns throughout the year, and all of them have a call to action, go and find the recommendations around the borough, and you kind of, you make it exciting and interesting, don't you?
Yeah, thank you for that. I ask because I think, as we've mentioned, it's really important that we take people on this journey with us, make sure the public are on board and whatnot. And my concern with citizen assemblies being that effectively, say we're having a citizen assembly on climate action, that the people that turn up to that are the people who are very passionate. And if you're then basing policy on what comes out of that citizen assembly when you're talking about quite an engaged part of the population, that it's not representative policy, I just wondered how you address that concern.
So I will let Stephanie talk about this because she absolutely knows about the process, but the whole idea of a citizens' assembly is that it is a representative sample of your borough. And I very vividly remember sitting in the room one day and just going, oh my God, that's our borough. We've got an 80-year-old and we've got a 12-year-old and we've got someone who doesn't have English as their first language and we've got a housewife and we've got it's just so, it's so powerful. But Stephanie can talk about the analytical process behind it.
Well, that's what I was going to say. So you send letters to all of the households or a percentage of the households. People then apply, and then the sortition process selects people to reflect the demographics of your borough, but also to reflect their attitudes on climate. Or so, in our Hackney jury on extreme heat, we had a climate denier, and we had someone who was deeply enthusiastic and already very active. So you get that reflective sample. That is that's the point of the groupings.
Yeah, thank you very much for that clarity on that. So then final question from me, then I'll hand back to the Chair, is what more would you like to see from the Mayor or Deputy Mayor to increase engagement across London on this?
If I had to say just one thing, because that's something that we've been talking to the government about as well, is at least start with a public engagement strategy, because that gives the rest of us a lot of the tools and the power to then do the work that we need to do for you. So a strategy just to start with.
I think I would say as part of that strategy, have a standing citizens panel that is advising you on a regular basis on decisions that you're making and actually links into the governance structures.
So for me, a lot of the funding streams look at other parts of our journey. I don't think there is enough funding for citizens' engagement, behaviour change. It's expensive, it's time consuming, but it is so important that we do it. So that's what I'd be asking for.
Agree. Set, I think, a much bigger ambition for what public engagement could be across the capital, leverage more resources for that, maybe from philanthropic funding. And I think as part of that, make sure we're really offering people a much wider range, much greater diversity of ways that they can participate, learning from other capitals around the world.
Thanks. Stephanie, can I ask a cheeky, very final question? When you're doing citizen assemblies, do you pay people for their time? Because, if you're going to involve marginalised communities or working class communities, you need to do that.
We think that's a really important part of it.
Perfect. Thank you all so much for closing what's been an excellent meeting, but closing it excellently. We've got a few more items of business to do, so feel free to leave the chamber. But thank you so much, and also thank you to Tyrone and Ashok before you, and to Mette and Catherine. I also just want to acknowledge that Nikki Gavron was mentioned a few times in this meeting, and I know that she was really a pioneer of climate on cities, and I just wanted to note that. Can I ask the committee to note the report and the discussion? Can we also delegate authority to me as chair in consultation with party group lead members to agree on the output arising from this discussion? Thank you. Can I ask the committee to note its work programme and the additional activities undertaken since its last meeting as specified in paragraph 4.1 of the report? Thank you. The next meeting of the committee is scheduled for 16th of October 2024 at 10 a.m. in committee rooms 2 and 3 at City Hall. No more urgent business, which concludes today's meeting. Thank you.